Why does double-blind science prove that a $200 wine glass makes absolutely no difference to the taste of wine, yet world-renowned experts swear it radically transforms the flavor,
Yeah, it's a crazy contradiction.
right? It really is. I mean, here's the bold statement for today. You believe things that aren't true. And where it gets really interesting is that many things that are true are only true because you believe them.
Exactly. I mean, if you think the expensive wine is better, it actually is bitter to you.
Right. So today we're taking a deep dive into the mechanics of those expectations. We're pulling apart some of the most provocative ideas from Seth Godin's work on marketing, storytelling, and, well, truth,
And we are going to reveal what might just be the ultimate secret to modern business.
which is that all successful marketers are storytellers, and the consumers who buy their products, meaning you, me, literally all of us, are complicit liars who actively want to be told a story.
Yeah, and the reason this matters for you, whether you're an entrepreneur trying to launch a startup or a job seeker sitting in an interview chair, or just someone trying to understand modern consumer culture, is that it completely shifts how you view success.
Right, it changes the whole game.
Totally. You'll learn why raw facts are often totally irrelevant in the short term, and why crafting an authentic, targeted story is really the only way to survive in our current low-trust world.
Because we're so quick to assume that reality is this objective, immutable thing, right? Like, we think our senses are like scientific instruments just coldly recording data.
But they aren't at all. They are heavily, heavily filtered through our expectations.
So I want to start by unpacking that biological need we have for these stories, or as this framework aggressively labels them, lies.
Right. The L word. It's
Right.
provocative.
It is. But humans are basically wired to use narratives as cognitive shortcuts. I mean, think about the sheer volume of data that hits your brain every single day.
Oh, it's staggering.
If you had to process the objective, raw, unfiltered facts of every single situation, every object, every interaction, your brain would just crash. It's an overwhelming amount of sensory input.
It is a phenomenal amount of data. Our brains consume about 20% of our body's energy,
Right.
despite being just this tiny fraction of our weight.
Wait, really? 20%?
Yeah. So if we tried to objectively analyze every single decision, like calculating the exact nutritional value of every item in a grocery store,
Yeah.
or, assessing the structural integrity of every chair before we sit down.
We'd be paralyzed.
Exactly. We wouldn't make it out of bed. So the brain creates heuristics, shortcuts.
We bundle complex realities into simple narratives.
Precisely. Because a narrative is just so much easier to store and retrieve than, like, a giant spreadsheet of raw data.
Yeah.
And historically, this isn't a new phenomenon brought on by modern advertising.
Right, this goes way back.
Way back, long before shopping carts and infomercials, human beings were looking up at the sky, noticing the sun moving from east to west every day.
And lacking astrophysics, they didn't just accept it as a random occurrence.
No, they created a story. They imagined the Greek god Helios pulling the sun across the sky in a fiery chariot. I mean, it made a terrifying, unpredictable universe feel ordered and understandable.
Oh, or think about early medicine. People were getting sick, and doctors had absolutely no concept of germ theory or cellular biology.
Right, so what did they do?
They created this elaborate story about imbalanced humors in the body to justify practices like bloodletting. The story provided a framework for action, even if the factual basis was, completely wrong.
That's a great example. The crucial takeaway here is that modern businesses did not invent storytelling. They didn't invent this cognitive vulnerability.
They just perfected how to exploit it.
Exactly. Consumers, meaning us, actually demand to be lied to, in a sense.
Yeah.
We just can't handle the raw truth of an endlessly complex, randomized world.
We're inherently superstitious creatures.
We really are. We tell ourselves these highly involved, emotional tales about how a new product is going to make us prettier or richer or more efficient or more socially accepted.
Which brings us perfectly back to that $200 wine glass I mentioned at the top of the show, because it is like the ultimate case study in this phenomenon.
The Rigel glasses.
Yeah, Joe Breedel, he's a 10th generation glassblower, and his company sells millions of dollars worth of these highly specialized, incredibly expensive wine glasses.
And the Riedel glass empire is built on a very specific, highly refined story. The company claims that every single beverage has a perfect, uniquely shaped glass that goes with it.
Right, like a different glass for every grape.
Exactly. The narrative they put out to the world is that the delivery of a wine's message, its bouquet, its subtle flavor notes, its finish, depends entirely on the physical form of the glass, guiding the liquid to specific taste receptors on your tongue.
And people buy it hook, line, and sinker. I mean, not just casual drinkers, but heavy hitters in the wine world.
Like who?
Like Thomas Matthews at Wine Spectator, or the famous reviewer Robert Parker Jr., who is arguably one of the most influential palates in the world. They absolutely swear by them.
Wow.
Yeah, Parker actually went on record saying the effect of these glasses on fine wine is profound. So you've got millions of wine drinkers around the globe buying into this story, stocking their cabinets with different shapes for Bordeaux, Burgundy, and Pinot Noir.
But then, we look at the actual science.
Right, the buzzkill.
Yeah, exactly. When researchers test this claim rigorously, using double-blind tests where the subject has absolutely no idea what shape the glass is like, maybe they're drinking through a tube, or they're blindfolded in a controlled environment, there is zero detectable difference.
Wait, zero?
Zero. Let me repeat that. A $1 thick glass from a diner and a $200 tissue-thin Riedel glass deliver the exact same physical chemical impact on the wine.
That just blows my mind. The science proves the glass doesn't change the wine at all, but the experts swear it does. So what is actually happening in the brain of the person holding that expensive glass?
Well, Daniel Swedling pointed this out brilliantly in Gourmet magazine. The flaw in the double-blind experiment isn't the chemistry, it's the psychology.
Because you take away the visual cue.
Right.
Yeah.
The wine genuinely tastes better to the person holding the Riedel glass because they believe it should. Taste is not an objective chemical analysis performed by a machine.
It's subjective.
Entirely subjective. It's an experience generated in the brain. If you expect the wine to taste profound, your brain literally alters your perception to match that expectation.
So the marketing, like the expensive glass, the elegant packaging, the endorsement from Robert Parker, is actually the product. The story makes the wine taste better.
Exactly. The glass is just the delivery mechanism for the story. It's a prop in the theatrical production of tasting fine wine.
I love that, a prop.
And this dynamic applies far beyond luxury physical goods. It dictates how services are sold, too. I mean, consider the real estate market.
Oh, there is a fantastic example here of a real estate agent named Arthur Riolo. He operates in a town north of New York City, and he sells more real estate than all of his competitors combined.
But if you analyze his process, he doesn't actually sell houses, does he?
No, not at all. If you get in a car with a standard real estate agent, they'll hand you a folder, they'll talk to you about square footage, the age of the roof, the local property tax rates, the R value of the insulation.
They're selling objective utility, facts.
Exactly, just facts. What Arthur does is entirely different. He takes his clients for a drive in his antique pickup truck.
Just the truck itself is a prop. It sets a whole mood.
Totally. It completely disarms the transaction. He drives up and down the hills of the neighborhood, pointing out houses that aren't even on the market.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he tells you who lives there, what they do for a living, the name of their golden retriever, the latest local gossip, the history of the Mothers Club in town. He spends hours weaving this dense, vibrant story about the community.
So by the time he finally pulls up to a house that is actually for sale, you aren't looking at drywall and plumbing.
Right, you're looking at your entry ticket into this idyllic community he just built in your mind.
You're buying into the story of the town and Arthur's trusted place in it. The house itself is almost secondary.
It really is. And it works in cutthroat business-to-business environments as well. Look at graphic design. It is incredibly difficult to differentiate yourself in a market like New York City, where thousands of talented designers are all competing for the same corporate contract.
Oh, absolutely. But there's a firm called Number 17, run by Bonnie Siegler and Emily Oberman. They boast massive clients like NBC, Sex and the City, Saturday Night Live.
And they don't win these contracts by just showing a portfolio of competent logos, right?
Not at all. They sell a vibe. Their entire operation is an exercise in storytelling. Their office is hidden away behind a nondescript door in an oddball, slightly gritty part of the city.
I love that.
Yeah, and their website, at least at the time this was analyzed, was exactly 1 page long, completely devoid of the usual corporate jargon, and people even debated whether there was a typo on it.
Wait, a typo on purpose?
Well, perceived as one. That perceived typo, that obscure office location, their dry humor, none of that is an accident. It's a highly curated, consistent story of iconoclastic exclusivity.
So they're subtly communicating to their clients like, we don't need to try too hard. We do unique avant-garde work, and we aren't for everyone. If you don't get the typo, you don't get us.
Exactly. If you're an executive at NBC and you hire them, you are buying the story that you are the kind of cool, in-the-know visionary who recognizes raw talent hidden behind a nondescript door. You're buying your own elevated self-image.
Okay, I have to push back a little on this word liar, though. The source material is very aggressive with that framing. All marketers are liars. Are we really saying we are all just walking around actively deceiving ourselves? It feels a bit cynical.
It does feel harsh, yeah.
To me, it feels less like delusion and more like a biological filtering mechanism. I mean, think about it like an overly aggressive email spam filter in your brain.
Okay, I like this. Go on.
If someone sends us raw, objective facts, like a spreadsheet of Arthur Riolo's house specs or the chemical composition of a shoe's rubber sole, it goes straight to the junk folder.
Right, the brain rejects it as unreadable, exhausting noise.
Exactly. But if it's wrapped up in a narrative, a subjective lie, or a story about how this house makes you a beloved neighbor, or how these shoes make you an athlete, it bypasses the filter and hits the primary inbox.
That is an incredibly accurate analogy. It's not about malicious deception. It's about cognitive bandwidth. The brain only has so much processing power. Facts require heavy cognitive lifting to evaluate.
Stories slide right in because they appeal to our emotions.
Yes, our emotions, our identities, and our pre-existing beliefs. The practical takeaway here is that if you want to spread an idea, sell a product, get hired for a job, or rally people to a cause, you must stop trying to communicate nothing but the facts.
You can't just hand someone a resume with bullet points and expect them to care.
You really can't rely on utility alone. You have to focus on what the person across the desk or the person walking down the aisle already believes. You have to work to tell them a story that seamlessly adds to that worldview.
Which brings up a fascinating paradigm shift regarding what people actually buy. It sounds like the era of making money by simply selling a commodity, meaning making a slightly better or slightly cheaper widget, is completely over.
Oh, it is functionally obsolete in the developed world. A long time ago, the old power curve rewarded people who just made stuff.
Right, like if you could figure out how to manufacture a hammer that didn't break or weave a shirt slightly cheaper than the guy one town over, you had a guaranteed path to profit.
Because the barrier to entry was the manufacturing process itself. But today, outsourcing, incredible advances in computing, robotics, and globalized supply chains have made manufacturing, quality control, and durability incredibly easy to achieve.
Everyone can make a good, cheap widget.
Everyone. The baseline for quality is so high that it works is no longer a selling point. It's the bare minimum expectation.
Which means the facts of the product, its raw utility, are basically irrelevant in the short run when it comes to standing out. We have to separate needs from wants.
Yes, needs are practical and objective. We need a certain number of calories to survive. We need basic shelter to keep the rain off our heads. We need a way to cover our feet so we don't get cut on rocks.
But once those basic survival needs are met, human behavior moves entirely into the realm of wants.
And wants are irrational. Wants are subjective. The new power curve, what we might call the curve of making stuff up, rewards inventing stuff worth talking about and constructing great stories around it.
So profitable growth today comes exclusively from satisfying subjective wants, not objective needs.
Exactly. This becomes incredibly obvious when you look at the automotive industry. Let's look at two specific vehicles, the Porsche Cayenne and the VW Touareg.
Oh, this is a perfect example. If you strip away the branding, these two cars are virtually the identical vehicle. They share a chassis, they share components, they are made by the same corporate parent, largely in the exact same factories.
The physical utility of the two objects is nearly indistinguishable. They will both transport you from point A to point B at the same speed, with the same level of physical comfort, carrying the same amount of cargo.
Yet the Porsche can easily cost $80,000, while the VW might cost $36,000.
That is a massive price gap for the exact same pile of metal and plastic.
Why does it exist? Because the person buying the Porsche isn't buying transportation. They aren't buying an engine and four wheels. They are buying the story of being a Porsche owner.
They're buying the feeling of pulling up to a valet stand and having people see the crest on the hood.
Yes, the extra $44,000 is literally just the price of the story.
And we see this same irrational math applied to everyday purchases, too. Walk into any grocery store and look at the egg section.
Oh, right. The premium eggs.
Yeah, consumers gladly pay a significant premium, sometimes double or triple the price, for eggs marketed loudly as being antibiotic-free. It feels like a healthy, responsible, caring choice for their family.
But the reality, based on agricultural regulations, is that all egg-laying chickens in the United States, even the ones laying the absolute cheapest generic store brand eggs, are raised without antibiotics. It's an industry standard.
Exactly. So the consumer is paying extra for the story of wholesomeness. They're buying peace of mind.
The factual utility of the premium egg and the cheap egg is identical, but the emotional utility of the premium egg is vastly superior because of the story printed on the cardboard carton.
There's a story that illustrates this emotional utility perfectly. It involves a young physical therapist named Stephanie. She goes to a boutique and drops $125 on a pair of limited edition Puma sneakers.
Okay, let's analyze this transaction. These sneakers cost maybe $3 to manufacture in a massive factory overseas. The materials are inexpensive: rubber, foam, and canvas. So when Stephanie is standing at the register handing over her credit card, is she thinking about the durometer of the sole material? Is she analyzing the tensile strength of the laces or the ergonomic arch support?
Absolutely not. She is buying a feeling. She is imagining how cool she's going to look walking into a cafe.
She's embracing this specific identity, that she is a successful, independent grown-up who can drop over $100 on ridiculously priced, fashionable sneakers after a hard day of work. She is rewarding herself.
The physical shoes are not the product. The way she felt when she bought them, the identity she slipped into when she laced them up, that was the actual product.
And this phenomenon isn't limited to physical goods you can take home. Sometimes the physical environment doesn't change at all, but the introduction of a story transforms the entire experience.
Oh, like Lucky Cheng's in New York.
Yes, consider Lucky Cheng's. For years, it was a wildly popular staple nightclub in the East Village. If you walked in off the street without knowing anything, it just looked like a fun, boisterous, slightly kitschy bar.
Right, the waitresses might seem to be trying a bit harder than usual, really vamping it up, wearing elaborate outfits, being very theatrical with the guests.
But then, usually whispered by the friend who brought you, you realize the secret: the waitresses are actually men in drag.
And instantly, the entire experience changes.
The physical dar hasn't changed. The alcohol in your glass is the same. The music playing on the speakers is the same. But your perception of the space is completely radically altered because you now know the trick.
The secret is the story. And the story is what you are actually consuming. It changes from a standard night out into an event, a spectacle, something you'll talk about at work on Monday.
Okay, but let me challenge this entire framework for a second, because I can hear listeners raising an eyebrow right now.
Sure, lay it on me.
It sounds like we're saying the actual physical quality of the product doesn't matter at all, that facts don't matter, and only the story matters. Isn't this just a recipe for snake oil salesmen?
That's a fair point.
I mean, if the story is everything, can't I just bottle tap water out of my sink, make up a lie about a mystical healing spring in the Himalayas, charge $50 a bottle, and get rich?
No, and that is the most crucial caveat in this entire philosophy of storytelling. Lying maliciously. Telling a story that fundamentally contradicts the reality of the product and doesn't hold up to scrutiny does not pay off anymore.
Because we live in an ultra-connected world.
Exactly. If you spin a tall tale about a product and it doesn't deliver the emotional or physical payoff you promised, people will talk. Reviews will plummet, social media will tear you apart, and you will crash and burn incredibly fast.
So the product must actually satisfy those emotional wants, not just pretend to.
Yes. Authentic storytelling only works if the core product holds up its end of the bargain. If you buy the Pumas to feel cool, the Pumas actually have to be recognized as cool by your peers. The design has to be aesthetically pleasing.
Because if they fall apart after one walk, or if everyone laughs at them, the story breaks.
The cognitive dissonance sets in, and the consumer feels cheated. It's the difference between a placebo that makes you feel better and a poison masked as a cure.
Right. If you tell a story about having superior white glove customer service, your representatives better actually be incredible on the phone.
You have to live the lie so completely that it becomes the objective truth of your business. If you try to build a beautiful story on a rotten core, you will fail spectacularly.
So the practical takeaway for you listening when evaluating your own business, your side hustle, or even how you present yourself in a job interview is to ask yourself a hard question.
Are you peddling a commodity based on utility, or are you selling an emotional experience?
Yeah, because if you are stuck in the middle, trying to make a slightly better drill bit, a slightly more nutritious muffin, or just listing your Excel skills on a resume, you are going to struggle.
You are fighting in the commodity trench. You have to pivot to the emotional experience. You have to figure out what story the end user wants to hear about themselves and become the prop that fulfills that story.
Which naturally leads us to a massive hurdle. You can't just tell any story to anyone. Consumers are not a monolithic block. They don't all want the same emotional experience.
Right. What makes one person feel successful might make another person feel frivolous. People clump together into common worldviews.
And a worldview is basically the lens someone uses to look at every single decision they make, right? From what brand of coffee to buy, to what political candidate to vote for, to whether they trust a doctor.
Exactly. A worldview encompasses all of a person's biases, their upbringing, their fears, and their aspirations.
Mm.
It is the sum total of their beliefs.
Like you might have one consumer whose worldview is, new technology always improves my life. I want to be the first to try everything.
Meanwhile, another consumer's worldview is, the next scientific innovation will probably destroy the Earth. I only trust things that are natural and ancient.
One person believes all car salesmen are liars trying to scam me, while another believes if it's expensive, it must be the highest quality.
And the golden rule of marketing and storytelling is that you absolutely cannot change someone's worldview. It is a monumental, catastrophic waste of time and money to try and convince a skeptic who hates technology that a new app is actually good for them.
But traditional brute force marketing treats everyone as a potential customer and tries to hammer them with facts until they yield.
It assumes that if you just present enough data, the skeptic will change their mind. But human psychology just doesn't work that way. Modern successful storytelling requires you to find a previously undiscovered clump of people who already share a worldview, and then use a frame to talk to them.
Let's define what we mean by a frame.
A frame consists of the specific words, images, context, and interactions that reinforce a bias someone is already feeling. It allows you to present a new idea in a way that embraces the consumer's existing worldview, rather than fighting against it.
Speaking respectfully to a person's worldview is the absolute baseline price of entry just to get their attention.
Yeah, and the power of framing is wild when you look at the exact same action described in two different ways. Think about downloading a movie online without paying for it.
Oh, this is a great one.
If you frame that action as file sharing, it appeals to a very specific worldview. It appeals to people who believe in open source freedom, community, anti-corporate rebellion, and democratizing information. The word sharing is inherently positive.
But if you frame that exact same digital action as stealing, it appeals to a completely different worldview. It appeals to people who value law and order, property rights, morality, and the protection of artists' livelihoods.
The physical action copying a digital file from a server is identical. The frame dictates who listens and how they judge the action.
We see this in politics constantly. It's the ultimate battle of frames. One group calls a piece of legislation firearms safety, appealing to a worldview of protection and community well-being.
And another group calls the exact same legislation banning handguns, appealing to a worldview of individual liberty and government overreach. The frame determines whether the message gets past that mental spam filter we talked about earlier.
I want to look at a massive corporate example of finding a worldview and changing the frame rapidly. General Mills and Lucky Charms.
Yes, the serial pivot.
So for 20 years, the breakfast cereal business was incredibly stable. Prices went up steadily, profits went up steadily. The worldview of the American parent was that cereal was a wholesome, convenient, perfectly acceptable breakfast for children.
And then the Atkins diet hit the mainstream.
The low-carb craze. It was a cultural earthquake.
Suddenly, almost overnight, the worldview of a massive chunk of the population changed. Carbohydrates, refined flours, and sugars went from being seen as harmless energy sources to being viewed as toxic.
Parents were no longer eager to feed their kids bowls of refined sugar for breakfast.
The old story of wholesomeness that cereal companies relied on completely collapsed under the weight of this new worldview. It was devastating for companies that couldn't adapt.
Right. Interstate Bakeries, the massive conglomerate behind Twinkies and Wonder Bread, actually went bankrupt during this period because they couldn't figure out how to sell their products to a world that suddenly feared carbs.
But General Mills saw this worldview shifting. They didn't try to fight it. They didn't launch a massive ad campaign trying to convince parents that carbs were actually good.
They accepted the new worldview and took action incredibly fast. Within less than 100 days of deciding to change their story, every major cereal brand at General Mills, including notoriously sugary cereals like Lucky Charms, was converted to a 100% whole grain formulation.
They didn't invent the Atkins diet. They didn't invent the low-carb worldview. But they recognized that the bias of their audience had shifted, and they quickly reframed their old, treasured brand to fit this new bias.
They hung a new frame, the words whole grain, around an old product to tell a story parents desperately wanted to believe. Parents wanted to believe they could still give their kids the convenient, tasty cereal they loved without being bad parents.
General Mills just provided the prop for that story. Let's look at another example of targeting specific worldviews, this time comparing two very different ways to grow a business. Masa versus Trek.
Okay, Masa is that insanely expensive, ultra-premium sushi restaurant in New York City, right?
Exactly. When they opened, there was already a huge community of people in New York who shared the general worldview. I like sushi.
But Masa didn't try to appeal to all of them. They didn't put out ads for all-you-can-eat specials or emphasize how quickly you could get your food. They ignored 99% of sushi eaters.
They targeted a micro worldview. They wanted the specific clump of people who like sushi and want to spend top dollar on the best in the world, exclusive, highly curated deluxe experience. They actively split the market.
When Masa announced a menu that cost hundreds of dollars per person, most people heard that story and said, "That's ridiculous. I would never pay that."
And Masa was perfectly happy with that reaction, because the small clump of people who wanted that deluxe story, the wealthy foodies who want to brag about getting a reservation to the most expensive place in town, believed it.
The high price was actually the frame. It proved exclusivity. And that micro audience was enough to make Masa a massive success.
Now contrast that micro-niche approach with Trek bicycles. For a long time, the entire high-end bicycle market was framed around one thing: going fast.
Right. Italian companies, Japanese upstarts, domestic builders, they all told stories about speed, aerodynamics, and racing heritage. They were talking to a worldview of young, competitive athletes.
But then Trek noticed something. They started looking at demographics and realized there was a massive underserved clump of people, aging baby boomers.
Ugh. As the boomers aged, their worldview changed. They still had money, they still wanted to be active, but they didn't want to hunch over a razor-thin racing bike that hurt their backs anymore. They wanted comfort.
So Trek stopped trying to sell speed to people who didn't want it. They framed their new lines of bikes around comfort mountain bikes with upright seating, hybrid bikes with shock absorbers in the seat posts that were actually a pleasure to ride, even if they had a high price tag and a racing brand heritage.
By framing around comfort rather than speed, they activated a huge new audience that the speed-obsessed companies were completely ignoring.
It was a brilliant pivot.
It makes me think of an analogy. It's like trying to convince a hardcore heavy metal fan to listen to a piece of classical music.
Okay, I can see where this is going.
If you walk up to a guy in a Slayer t-shirt and pitch a Beethoven symphony by saying, "You'll love this, it's so relaxing and soothing, it really calms the nerves," they will just ignore you. It completely conflicts with their worldview of what music should be.
Right, they'll just tune it out completely.
But if you reframe it, if you say, "You need to hear this. This is the darkest, most intense, most mathematically complex music ever written. The composer was going deaf and he channeled all his rage into this piece."
Suddenly they're listening.
You didn't change the notes on the page. You wrapped the new idea in their existing armor. You aren't changing their taste, you're changing the frame to fit the taste.
That is exactly how it works. Stop treating every consumer as a potential customer who is just like all the other potential customers. Your job is to identify the specific, clumpy biases of a niche group, understand their fears and desires, and match your story perfectly to their pre-existing beliefs.
Okay, so we know we need a story. We know we can't just rely on facts, and we know we need to frame it to a specific worldview, but how do we actually get them to notice us in the first place?
Yeah, that's the big question.
We are bombarded by thousands of messages a day. How do you get someone to pause their life for 5 seconds to even look at your frame? That brings us to the psychology of attention and snap judgments.
If you want to tell a great story, you have to understand the biological machinery of the brain that's going to receive it. And the absolute first rule of the brain is that attention is a finite, highly protected, precious commodity.
Consumers do not notice anything until they actively choose to pay attention to it.
Exactly.
No.
And because there is simply too much to look at, think about walking down the aisle of a massive supermarket with 40,000 different products. Our default evolutionary setting is to ignore almost everything.
If we processed every colorful box in the cereal aisle, we would never make it to the dairy section. So to break through that default state of ignoring things, the brain is designed to look for 2 specific triggers: differences and causation.
Let's start with differences. When we encounter an environment, we immediately establish a baseline, a status quo. Once the status quo is established, we stop seeing it. We only notice things that break the pattern.
If it's not new, if it's not different, it is practically invisible.
To illustrate how deep this biological wiring goes, let's look at the example of the frog and the fly.
I love this biological parallel. So, consider a bullfrog. A frog's brain weighs about 24 grams. A human brain is massive, about 60 times larger, incredibly complex.
Right.
Yet most humans, with all our evolutionary brain power and spatial reasoning, cannot snatch a fast-moving erratic housefly out of midair with our bare hands. It's incredibly difficult. But a frog with a tiny brain does it every single day with pinpoint accuracy. How?
The frog achieves this incredible feat because its tiny brain is hyper-optimized for one singular task, hunting moving insects. A frog is actually biologically unable to see anything that is motionless. Their visual cortex filters it out entirely.
That's crazy.
If you were to take a frog and surround it with a pile of recently killed, perfectly edible but completely stationary bugs, the frog will literally starve to death. It doesn't even register that the food is there. It only watches the visual field for movement.
By completely ignoring the static environment and only focusing on what's new and different, the erratic flight of a live bug, it becomes incredibly efficient at catching its prey.
And human beings, despite our big brains, do the exact same thing in our modern environment. We scan the world for changes. Think about driving your car.
Oh, yeah. You look at the dashboard occasionally to check your speed, but you generally ignore the odometer. Have you ever been driving on a long road trip and you just happen to look down exactly as the odometer flips from 99,999 to 100,000? All those zeros line up.
It feels like a magic moment.
It feels like a massive coincidence. You didn't look at it for the past 200 miles, but somehow you caught the exact moment of the big change. It's not magic. It's not a coincidence.
Your brain's peripheral vision was monitoring the dashboard the entire time, filtering out the slow, static ticking of the numbers as useless noise.
But when all the digits rolled over at once, it created a massive visual difference. The movement triggered your brain's frog instinct, and it forced your conscious attention to look down.
We only see the change. And once we notice a difference, once our attention is hijacked, our brain immediately moves to the second step, causation.
Humans hate randomness. We are deeply uncomfortable with things happening for no reason.
So when we notice a change, we want to know why it happened. We instantly make up a rule or a theory to explain it. We establish causation, even if it's just a random correlation or a complete coincidence.
And this is where it gets incredibly dangerous for human logic, because once we make that snap judgment to explain the causation, we lock it in. We treat our newly invented theory as an absolute fact.
This is the mechanism behind cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort, the literal psychological friction that occurs when a person holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values.
Humans despise this feeling.
Despise it. So once a human being makes a snap judgment about something or someone, we will do everything in our power to support that initial judgment and ignore any contradictory data just to avoid the pain of being wrong.
We curate reality to protect our ego. The political arena is the most obvious example of this. Think about highly polarizing presidents: Kennedy, Nixon, Clinton.
People usually have very strong, deeply entrenched opinions about them. They either revere them or they despise them.
But objectively, all three of these men did heroic, beneficial deeds for the country, and all three did incredibly embarrassing, damaging, or unethical things. But it's too hard for the human brain to hold contradictory ideas. It causes dissonance to say, I hate this person, but they did a good thing.
So if you made a snap judgment early on that you hate Nixon, every new piece of data you encounter about him for the rest of your life is filtered to support that view.
You completely ignore the geopolitical successes and hyper-focus on the paranoia and the scandals to prove your initial snap judgment was correct.
It works exactly the same way with consumer brands, even on a sensory level. Look at the classic blind taste tests between Coke and Pepsi.
Oh, this is wild.
Research shows time and time again that people's brand loyalty overrides their physical senses. If you take a diehard Coke fan, someone whose worldview and identity is tied to the classic Americana story of Coca-Cola, and you trick them.
You pour Pepsi into a Coke can.
Yes. You put Pepsi in a Coke can and hand it to them. They will drink it, smile, and often say they prefer the Coke can over a Pepsi can sitting next to it.
Their bias, their deeply held snap judgment about the superiority of the red can literally overrides their physical taste buds.
The brain alters the sensory input to avoid the cognitive dissonance of admitting they like the rival brand. They're drinking the can, not the beverage inside it.
The speed at which these snap judgments happen is terrifying. We don't wait for all the data to come in. We look at a tiny glimpse of data and invent an entire elaborate story.
Right. There's an example of looking at a zoomed-in picture. It's just a tiny square of wrinkled gray skin with two white tubes curving out of it.
It's just a fraction of a drawing, but your brain instantly screams, elephant! You don't just see the skin, you imagine the tusks, the huge feet, the floppy ears, maybe even the smell of the zoo or the sound of a trumpet, all generated from one tiny visual cue.
Malcolm Gladwell explored this extensively in his book Blink. We do this with people and businesses every day. We call it thin slicing.
We take in the way a person looks, how they stand, how they smell, the vernacular they use, the lighting in a retail store, the specific type of muzak playing in the background, and we instantly, subconsciously come to a massive conclusion about their trustworthiness, their competence, and their value.
And consumers will invent incredibly complex stories to justify these snap judgments based on environmental cues. One of my absolute favorite examples is the story of the U-Haul speakers.
Oh man, back in the 1980s, there were these entrepreneurs who bought a huge shipment of discounted brand name stereo speakers. But instead of renting a storefront, buying display racks, and running newspaper ads like a normal electronics retailer, they did something brilliant.
They packed all the speakers into the back of a rented U-Haul truck.
They drove the truck onto college campuses, parked in the alley behind a Harvard dorm, cracked the roll-up door, and whispered to passing students, "Psst, hey, you want to buy some speakers?"
It's a masterpiece of environmental framing. Think about the cues. A rented truck, an alleyway, a whisper, no receipts, cash only. The sellers never once, at any point, said the speakers were stolen.
But the students looked at the U-Haul, heard the whisper, and their brains instantly established causation. They made a snap judgment. These guys definitely stole these speakers from a warehouse. They need to offload them fast, and I am about to get a massive illegal deal on the black market.
The students bought the speakers in droves. They didn't buy them because they meticulously researched the acoustic properties of the woofers. They bought them because they bought the story of beating the system.
They wanted to feel like savvy insiders pulling one over on the corporate world. They invented the lie themselves based entirely on the environmental cues provided by the U-Haul truck.
Which brings up a really unsettling point about how fragile these stories can be. In the middle of the source text, Seth Godin pulls this incredible fake-out on the reader.
Oh, this part got me.
You are reading along, absorbing all these business lessons, and suddenly he writes a paragraph saying, I have to confess something. I didn't actually write this book. I was too busy. It was entirely ghostwritten by a freelancer named Mo Samuels based on a skimpy 3-page outline I gave him.
If you are a fan of Seth Godin, reading that paragraph makes your blood pressure immediately spike. You feel cheated. You feel betrayed. You instantly devalue all the ideas in the book you just read.
You experience massive cognitive dissonance. You thought you were receiving wisdom from a marketing master, and suddenly you were told you bought a cheap knockoff from an unknown freelancer.
But then, in the very next paragraph, Godin apologizes and admits he was just pulling your leg. He really wrote every word of the book. Mo Samuels doesn't exist.
But the emotional point is viscerally made. The identity of the author is a crucial load-bearing part of the story. Even if the words printed on the page are exactly letter for letter the same, your perception of their value changes based on the story of who wrote them.
If Mo Samuels wrote it, you feel scammed and you hate it. If Seth Godin wrote it, you feel enlightened and you love it. The lie, the context of the creator, is as important as the ideas inside.
But wait, let's explore the danger here. If human beings make these permanent, locked-in, snap judgments based on tiny glimpses of data, if an HR manager decides whether to hire you based on the first 6 seconds you walk into the room, or if a customer decides a restaurant is terrible because there is a single smudge on the front glass door, how does a business protect itself?
You can't control every tiny variable. This brings us to what is called the myth of the first impression.
Yes, the myth is not that first impressions don't matter. They are absolutely critical, perhaps the most important factor in any relationship or transaction. The myth is the arrogant belief that you, as the marketer or the business owner, know when that first impression is actually going to happen.
Exactly. You might spend a fortune dressing your sales force in $1,000 Armani suits thinking, when the client sees the suit, that will be the first impression. But what if it isn't?
What if the customer's actual first impression was the incredibly annoying, staticky hold music they were forced to listen to for 10 minutes before they even got transferred to the salesperson in the suit?
Or consider the example of email communication. You might have a beautiful website, but what if the first impression is an email from your receptionist?
If that email uses poor grammar or relies heavily on overly casual, overused words like actually, totally, or absolutely, which Pat Holt points out can be massive red flags for certain demographics, that poorly written email becomes the first impression.
The customer's brain makes a snap judgment about your competence, and they ignore your Armani suit entirely.
You never know this input, which tiny slice of data is going to generate the first impression that locks in the cognitive dissonance. And this is why authenticity is not just a nice moral concept. It is your only practical shield.
Authenticity is the only scalable defense mechanism against snap judgments. You must live the lie completely.
If your story is that your organic farm cares about the earth, but a customer happens to drive behind your building and sees you dumping chemical runoff into a creek, the story is dead.
If your sign is cool, your location is cool, and your Instagram is highly curated, but your actual physical products are terrible or your staff is rude and dismissive, you are not telling a coherent story.
The cognitive dissonance will break the wrong way. The consumer will feel tricked, and they will punish you for it. But if your organization is radically, obsessively authentic from top to bottom, from the CEO's behavior down to the quality of the toilet paper in the customer restroom, then no matter what trunk or tusk the consumer happens to see first, they arrive at the exact same conclusion. They get the exact same story.
Look at the Acumen Fund as a prime example of this radical authenticity. They are a philanthropy group, but they operate in a crowded market where traditional charities are constantly begging for donations with pictures of starving children.
Acumen didn't try to shout louder with the same story.
Instead, they completely reframed their story. They don't even use the word donation. They frame their model as non-donation philanthropy or offering social capital dividends. They treat philanthropy like venture capital.
And crucially, they don't target everyone. They only target the fringe 10% of restless, wealthy investors who are frustrated with the inefficiency of traditional charities.
They tell a thrilling, unorthodox story about systemic change and return on investment to the people at the edges who actually want to hear it.
And because they back that story up with authentic action, they actually measure returns, they actually vet their projects like businesses, those early believers become evangelists. They spread the story to their peers.
Acumen doesn't offer standard charity attributes. They offer a new way for investors to belong and feel smart.
So the ultimate takeaway here is never offer standard attributes. Don't go to market saying you have decent quality at a decent price with an industry standard warranty. No one cares. It's not remarkable.
It doesn't trigger the frog to see the fly. No one will ever excitedly tell their friends about a decent price. You have to offer a shortcut, a miracle, a feeling of social success, or a tribe to belong to.
And you have to be so radically authentic that every single snap judgment a customer could possibly make confirms that exact story.
It's time to bring all these threads together. If we synthesize everything we've unpacked today from this deep dive into Seth Godin's framework, we arrive at a really beautiful, powerful paradox.
Yes, the paradox at the very soul of this philosophy. The most successful marketing, the most successful storytelling isn't actually about deception at all. It's about radical authenticity.
Because consumers are already overwhelmed, they are desperate to tell themselves a story to make sense of the world. They want to believe that your $200 wine glass makes the wine taste better because it makes them feel sophisticated.
They want to believe your limited edition sneakers make them look like a successful professional because it validates their hard work.
Your job isn't to trick them with raw facts or bore them with spreadsheets of specs. Your job is to engineer a remarkable product or a remarkable service that perfectly and authentically fulfills the exact emotional story they are already waiting to believe.
You find the worldview,
Right.
you frame the narrative so they can hear it, and then you live that story so completely that it becomes their truth.
It requires a massive shift in how we approach business. It's a shift from being a cold scientist of utility to being an empathetic artist of human emotion.
I absolutely love that framing. A shift from a scientist of utility to an artist of emotion.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive and helping unpack these mechanisms. Now that you know how to frame a story that slips right past the brain's defenses and fulfills our deepest wants, what happens when that story starts jumping from host to host, infecting an entire culture like a virus? That's what we'll uncover in our next deep dive. What if the observable reality of a product has almost nothing to do with why you actually buy it?
Right, which is, I mean, that's a wild thought.
It is, because I want you to really think about that for a second. We operate under this collective delusion that we are rational actors, just
Yeah.
navigating a marketplace of objective facts.
Right, like we're all just walking around with calculators in our heads.
Exactly. We think we buy the laptop with the fastest processor or the car with the best safety rating or, the software with the highest ROI. But what if the physical, measurable reality of those things is, well, what if it's entirely secondary?
Which is such a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people.
It really is. What if you're actually just buying the story you tell yourself about them?
It fundamentally breaks how most people understand commerce, I think,
Mm-hmm.
because we're conditioned from a very young age, especially if you're in a business environment, to worship at the altar of features and specs.
Oh, absolutely. The raw utility of it.
Yeah, right. But when you start to rigorously analyze human behavior, like when you look at what actually drives adoption or brand loyalty or even massive cultural shifts, the objective reality is almost always a distant second to the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
The physical object is just the anchor.
Yeah.
The story is the actual experience.
Which is exactly why we are dedicating this entire deep dive to the core philosophy inside Seth Godin's work, specifically focusing on the concepts laid out in his chapter, Got Marketing.
Yeah, this chapter is, it's foundational.
It really is. So if you are an entrepreneur or a leader navigating some corporate hierarchy or just someone fascinated by how ideas actually take root in society, this is going to dismantle everything you thought you knew about how value is created. We're moving way past the outdated idea in marketing as just spam or billboards or clever slogans. By the end of this deep dive, you're going to understand the architecture of human belief.
And why the global economy has basically inverted itself.
Right. And how you can harness the mechanics of storytelling to make your own ideas spread.
Because the shift in perspective here, it's irreversible. Once you understand the underlying mechanics of how narrative overrides objective reality, you begin to see it everywhere.
You really can't unsee it.
You can't. It changes how you evaluate a SaaS platform, how you interpret a political movement, and most importantly, how you position your own value in a really commoditized world.
So let's start by just tearing down the old infrastructure, because when we use the word marketing, it carries a tremendous amount of baggage.
Oh, so much baggage.
Right. For most people, it immediately conjures up interruption. It's the used car salesman or that pop-up ad that completely ruins the article you're trying to read.
Or those old commercials for whisk laundry detergent.
Oh, man, the ring around the collar ones?
Yes. The ones pounding that phrase into your skull through just sheer repetition, it's noise.
Sure noise.
And that noise was the defining characteristic of the industrial age of media. For 50 years, marketing was essentially this brute force mathematical equation.
You just bought attention, right?
Exactly. You bought attention, usually through mass media monopolies like network television or huge print syndicates, and you interrupted people with a jingle or a feature list. The whole strategy was volume and repetition.
It was entirely about yelling louder than the competition until the consumer simply, capitulated and remembered your slogan at the grocery store.
Right, they just surrendered to the jingle.
Yeah.
But the framework we're exploring today completely upends that industrial model. The new definition of marketing is stripped down to its most profound essence. Marketing is simply the act of spreading an idea.
Just spreading an idea, which, it sounds almost too elementary on the surface.
It does simple.
But the text elevates this to a civilizational level. It makes the argument that spreading ideas is the single most important output of our entire civilization.
Because it is the engine of human progress.
Yeah.
We tend to separate marketing from important things, right? Like as if marketing is just for selling soda and luxury cars.
Right, we put it in this little box.
Exactly. But the text uses some incredibly stark examples to prove that the mechanics of spreading an idea are universal. Look at the major world religions, for instance.
Okay.
These are belief systems that dictate the moral frameworks, daily habits, and life trajectories of billions of people. Religions thrive, expand, or just fade into obscurity based entirely on their ability to spread their core narrative.
That makes a lot of sense.
The architecture of a cathedral, the structure of a parable, the rituals of a community, these are all highly sophisticated mechanisms for spreading an idea.
Wow. And the text pushes this even further into the geopolitical realm, which is where it gets highly provocative.
It does.
It brings up horrific humanitarian crises, specifically citing the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people in Sudan, and it frames that tragedy as a failure of marketing.
Which is a heavy thing to hear.
It's extremely heavy, meaning the people who cared about the crisis failed to spread the story in a way that actually compelled the international community to take decisive action.
And that framing forces us to confront our own biases about the word itself, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Because when you view a geopolitical tragedy through the lens of idea dissemination, it strips away all that superficiality we usually associate with the word marketing.
Right. It's not about selling soap anymore.
Exactly. We realize that human beings do not act purely on objective data. You can present the United Nations or just the global public with undeniable objective facts about a famine or conflict, and it might generate nothing more than a momentary sigh.
Because the failure isn't in the data.
No, the failure is in the translation of that data into a story that actually triggers human empathy and urgent action.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second because I can hear the pushback from the listener. Framing a devastating humanitarian crisis or the deep theological tenets of a religion as marketing campaigns, doesn't that inherently trivialize them?
I get why people feel that way, yeah.
It feels like we're taking the most profound aspects of the human experience and, I don't know, reducing them to the language of a Madison Avenue boardroom.
It's a completely natural reaction to feel that friction. But the argument here is that we have it completely backward. Applying the concept of marketing to the crisis in Sudan doesn't trivialize the crisis.
Okay, so what does it do?
Well, the reality is that decades of hucksters, spam emails, and cheap commercials have trivialized the word marketing.
Oh, that is a critical distinction. The word itself has been hijacked.
Exactly. We've allowed the concept of spreading ideas to be co-opted by people selling junk. But human rights, global health, education, philosophical truth, these issues are far too important to be left to just, hoping people figure it out.
Right, hoping the facts speak for themselves.
Because they don't. You can possess the most objectively true, morally righteous idea in the world. But if you do not understand the mechanics of how to implant that idea into the minds of others and compel them to act, that idea will die in a vacuum.
Oh.
If marketing is the art and science of spreading an idea, then mastering it is actually a moral imperative.
Which brings us to a highly practical takeaway for you, the listener. Whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, whether you're an entrepreneur launching some disruptive tech startup, or a nonprofit director trying to secure grants, or even just a mid-level manager trying to convince your executive team to adopt a new workflow, you have to stop thinking about your objective facts as the deliverable.
Yes, the facts aren't enough.
You cannot just build the thing or compile the data and expect the inherent goodness or efficiency of it to win the day. You have to take responsibility for architecting the story that allows that idea to spread.
And to architect that story effectively, you have to understand a fundamental psychological mechanism. You have to understand how the human brain actually processes reality versus how it processes belief.
This is where we get into the core secret revealed in the chapter, which is the massive disconnect between physical reality and subjective belief.
It's fascinating.
It really is. Every successful organization, whether they consciously realize it or not, exploits this disconnect. And the text uses a brilliant real-world scenario to illustrate this, which is Lucky Cheng's.
Ah, yes. The Lucky Cheng's example is the perfect encapsulation of this entire philosophy.
So for those who aren't familiar, Lucky Cheng's was this legendary, wildly successful restaurant and nightclub in the East Village of New York. The scenario plays out like this. You walk into this establishment and the atmosphere is just electric.
Right, super high energy.
The music is loud, the patrons are boisterous, everyone is laughing and having an incredible time, the drinks are flowing. You look around and see the waitstaff.
Yeah.
These women in glamorous outfits completely vamping it up, working the room, and playing beautifully to the crowd.
By all objective measures, it is a thriving, high-energy hospitality experience.
Exactly. But then you look a little closer, and the twist is revealed. You realize that the waitresses are actually men in drag.
And that moment of realization is where the entire concept of modern value creation crystallizes. Think about what happens in the brain of the patron the exact second they realize the trick. Everything about their experience changes instantly.
But the physical reality didn't change at all.
That is the crucial point. The physical, observable reality of that room remains absolutely static. The chemical composition of the vodka in the glass hasn't changed.
Right.
The decibel level of the music is identical. The physical layout of the tables, the temperature of the room, the actual people sitting next to you, none of it has altered by a single molecule.
Literally nothing physically shifted.
Yet the patron's experience of that reality has completely transformed. Why? because the context changed. The story they were telling themselves about where they were and what they were participating in was rewritten.
I love this because it maps perfectly onto, like, a classic magician's stage prop.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Think about the wooden box an illusionist uses to make someone disappear. If you walk into a hardware store and see that box sitting on a shelf, your brain processes its physical reality. It's, half-inch plywood, some black paint, and some brass hinges.
Right, it's just materials.
Objectively, it's worth maybe $30 in raw materials. It evokes zero emotional response. But you take that exact same arrangement of atoms, place it on a stage under dramatic lighting, and have a magician tell a captivating story about how this box was discovered in a haunted Victorian theater and possesses ancient properties.
Suddenly, it's not plywood anymore.
Exactly. The audience's physical reaction to the box completely changes. Their pupils dilate, their heart rate elevates, they lean forward in their seats, they gasp when the door opens. The value they're experiencing isn't derived from the plywood. The value is entirely generated by the story overlaying the plywood.
And the most profound part of that dynamic is that the audience wants the story. They aren't being maliciously defrauded.
They bought the ticket.
Exactly. They bought a ticket specifically to participate in the illusion. They know, on a rational level, that the box isn't haunted and that the assistant isn't actually being sawed in half. But they willingly suspend that rational knowledge because the emotional experience of the story is highly valuable to them.
So we understand this in the context of entertainment or nightlife. We accept that people pay for theatricality. But the text argues that this exact same disconnect between reality and belief governs almost everything we buy, including the most mundane, everyday items.
Oh, absolutely.
It brings up hospital cribs and cans of soup. I always find the hospital crib example fascinating, because you'd assume that pediatric healthcare procurement is the one arena where storytelling is completely outlawed, right?
You'd think so.
You'd think pure, objective, tensile strength and safety data wins, but it's actually the opposite, isn't it?
It absolutely is. When a hospital administrator or even a parent looks at a top-tier, incredibly expensive hospital crib, they're not behaving like material scientists.
Right, they don't have a lab testing kit with them.
No. They aren't running mathematical models on the specific gravity of the plastic or the sheer strength of the aluminum joints. What they're actually doing is consuming a narrative.
A narrative of safety.
Yes. The design of the crib, the branding, the price point, all of these elements combine to tell a story of uncompromising safety, medical-grade protection, and peace of mind. If you offer them a crib manufactured in the exact same facility, with the exact same materials, but you branded it cheaply and sold it for a tenth of the price,
They would reject.
they would completely reject it.
Because the cheap price breaks the story of uncompromising safety.
Precisely. The objective reality of the cheap crib is identical, but the subjective story is broken. And the same applies to soup. When you eat a premium brand of organic soup, you aren't just tasting the sodium content in the dehydrated carrots.
What are you tasting?
You are tasting the story of comfort or home or health that the brand has meticulously engineered. The human brain does not act like a scientific instrument recording objective reality.
Right, we aren't robots.
We're biological sense-making machines. We filter every piece of sensory input through our pre-existing biases, our fears, our desires, and the stories we desperately want to be true. In the modern economy, the story doesn't just help sell the product. The story is the product experience.
Okay, so if you're building a product, offering a service, or even just marketing yourself as a freelancer, the practical takeaway here is brutal, but so liberating.
Yeah, it really is.
If you're a freelance graphic designer, do not just sell the Adobe Illustrator files you produce. The files are the plywood. You have to craft the overarching narrative, the client experience, the context that makes them feel a specific way when they work with you.
You have to build the stage and the lighting.
Right. You have to build the stage and the lighting around your work. Otherwise, you are just competing on the price of plywood.
But to actually execute that, you have to let go of the most stubborn, deeply ingrained myth in modern business. And it's a myth that is taught in almost every MBA program in the world.
Ah, the myth of the rational consumer?
That's the one.
This is where we have to challenge the data analysts and the financial modelers who might be listening. Because businesses, by default, operate under this incredibly persistent assumption that human beings are rational calculators.
Right. The prevailing logic is, if we just present the consumer with perfect objective information, if we show them that our battery lasts 12% longer or our software is 5% cheaper, They will process that data logically and make the correct, rational choice to buy our product.
And the text points out that this conceit isn't just found in direct-to-consumer retail. It is especially prevalent and actually especially dangerous in business-to-business or B2B environments.
Oh, B2B is the worst offender here.
We have this collective hallucination that while consumers buying shoes might be emotional, professionals making large-scale corporate purchases are strictly analytical.
Which is just not true. And to understand why this rational model is broken, the chapter looks back at the history of marketing theory, specifically highlighting a classic concept, positioning, introduced by Jack Trout, now Reese.
Right. And the text actually praises it, calling it one of the most important marketing books ever written. But it makes a crucial distinction. It says, positioning is only a starting point, and that if you rely on it today, you will fail.
Right. So positioning was revolutionary when it came out because it introduced the idea that a brand isn't what you say it is. It's the specific space you occupy in the consumer's mind relative to your competitors.
Okay.
But the way it is traditionally practiced is entirely one-dimensional and binary. It relies on rational comparisons. It dictates that if your main competitor is known as the cheap option, you must position yourself as the premium expensive option.
Got it. If they are the fast, convenient option, you must position yourself as the slow, deliberate, artisanal option.
Exactly. It's a very clean, logical grid.
So why doesn't that work anymore? Like, why can't a software startup just enter a market, look at the incumbent, and say, they are the slow, bloated legacy software,
Yeah.
we are the fast, agile alternative, and just win the market rationally?
Because of the radical transformation of our media environment, we have to look at the signal-to-noise ratio. When positioning was written, we lived in an era of massive information scarcity.
Right. There are, what, 3 major television networks?
3 networks, a few national magazines, and local newspapers. That was it. If a company chose a simple binary position like Avis, saying, we tried harder because we are number 2, they could broadcast that single rational message via a television commercial to a captive audience.
And the consumer actually had the mental bandwidth to receive that signal.
Exactly. They could process it rationally and file it away in their brain's filing cabinet.
But today, that filing cabinet is on fire.
It's completely incinerated. We live in an environment of infinite information density. Consumers are bombarded by thousands of commercial messages, notifications, and algorithms every single day.
Right.
You cannot just beam a one-dimensional rational fact like our servers are 12% faster at a modern consumer and expect them to rationally process, verify, and accept it. They will ignore it.
They just don't have the time.
They don't have the cognitive capacity to run a comparative analysis on every product they encounter. So what do? They default to heuristics, they default to emotion, they default to the story that resonates with their worldview.
The implications of this are staggering for anyone running a business. If consumers are irrational, and if they're making decisions based on subjective emotional wants rather than objective rational needs, then competing purely on the basis of better, faster, cheaper is a guaranteed path to failure.
It is a race to the bottom.
There will always be a competitor with a slightly lower overhead who can make it a penny cheaper, or some new tech that can make it a millisecond faster.
Which brings us back to the B2B space, because this is where the pushback is always the strongest.
Let's dive deep into that, because I want to put myself in the shoes of an enterprise sales director listening to this.
Okay, go for it.
They are thinking, okay, maybe consumers buying soup or nightclub experiences are buying a story, but my target audience is a VP of procurement at a Fortune 500 company. They are tasked with buying 10,000 enterprise laptops for a global workforce.
Right, big stakes.
They aren't buying a vibe. They have a massive matrix of RAM specifications, processor speeds, amortized costs, and SLA agreements. They have to be rational. Their entire career depends on the objective data in that spreadsheet.
It is the ultimate illusion of rationality. Let's deconstruct what is actually happening in the mind of that VP of procurement. Yes, they have a massive spreadsheet. Yes, they are running financial models. But the spreadsheet is not the decision maker.
So what is it?
The spreadsheet is the alibi.
The spreadsheet is the alibi. I want to underline that phrase.
Fundamentally, even at the highest levels of enterprise B2B sales, that VP is buying a story. What story are they actually buying? Well, in many corporate environments, they're buying the story of risk mitigation. They're buying the story of safety. There was an old famous saying in the tech world, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM.
Right. If you buy the legacy incumbent and the servers crash, you blame the servers. If you buy the unproven startup and the servers crash, you get fired.
Exactly. The VP might look at the spreadsheet and see that the legacy brand is 15% more expensive and objectively slower than the new startup, but they will still choose the legacy brand, and they will subconsciously manipulate the weighting of the criteria in the spreadsheet to justify it.
Because the story of that brand makes them feel secure in their job.
Yes, they are purchasing career preservation.
Or, to look at the flip side of that same coin, let's say the VP is highly ambitious. They want to be seen as a disruptive innovator by the CEO.
In that case, they're buying a completely different story. They want the story that makes them look like a savvy, aggressive negotiator who is modernizing the company. So they go with the upstart brand.
Right, they buy the disruption story.
They buy the story of disruption and cost-saving brilliance, which they can proudly present at the next board meeting. The objective specs of the laptops are entirely secondary to the emotional state the VP is trying to achieve. The spreadsheet is just a rational tool they wield to justify the emotional want they've already committed to fulfilling.
The practical takeaway here is profound for anyone in sales, pitching, or leadership. You must never assume your audience is making decisions based purely on the rational facts you present.
Never.
Whether you are pitching a new multi-million-dollar software initiative to your CEO or just trying to convince your team to adopt a new project management tool, you have to look past the features. You must identify the underlying emotional state, the fear, the ambition, the desire for status, the need for safety that they are trying to fulfill for themselves.
Speak directly to that unstated story.
Yes, speak to the story and provide them with the rational data only as an alibi to justify the choice.
And understanding that fundamental shift, the realization that value is derived from subjective stories rather than objective features, perfectly sets up the grand macroeconomic shift that the chapter illustrates next.
This is the visual core of the chapter, and it's a framework that completely reshapes how you view the global economy. It's the shift from the old power curve to the new power curve. Let's break this down meticulously for you listening, because understanding where you are on this curve is critical for the survival of any business or career.
Let's start by mapping out the old curve, which the text refers to as the curve of making stuff. Visually, I want you to imagine a standard bell curve. It looks like an inverted U or a large hill.
The classic distribution curve. Okay, so in this historical model, where did the economic value live? Where were the massive profits generated?
Historically, the massive value, the leverage, and the enormous profit margins were all concentrated right in the fat high middle of that bell curve. That middle section represents production. It is the actual physical manufacturing of the thing.
Okay, and what about the edges?
On the low left tail of the curve, you had invention, the eccentric engineers tinkering in the garage, coming up with the initial idea. And on the low right tail of the curve, you had marketing, the salespeople tasked with figuring out how to distribute it.
The overriding mantra of this entire era was essentially, make good stuff for cheap.
That was the only strategy you needed. If you could engineer a slightly more efficient factory, if you could source raw materials a fraction of a cent cheaper, and if you could run a tighter assembly line with fewer defects, you dominated the market.
The heroes of the old power curve were the operational masters.
Exactly. They were the factory foremen, the supply chain logistics experts, the Six Sigma quality control managers walking the floor with clipboards. If you nailed the production in the middle of the curve, advertising was basically an afterthought.
It was just there to sweep up the rest of the market demand.
Yeah, you had a superior, cheaper physical product, so consumers bought it rationally.
But the text argues that this old bell curve has collapsed. We are no longer living on the hill. We are now living on the new curve. And visually, this new curve is the exact inverse. It looks like a standard U-shape. It's a valley.
Right. And in this valley, the entire economic model is flipped upside down. Production, the actual making of the physical stuff, is now at the very bottom of the U. It generates the least amount of relative value and the lowest profit margins in the modern economy.
Let's really interrogate that. Why has making the thing, which used to be the cornerstone of industrial wealth, suddenly become the least valuable part of the equation?
Because making stuff is no longer a scarce or differentiated skill. We have lived through decades of intense globalization, the rise of the internet, and the perfection of advanced logistics and manufacturing software. The middle has been completely commoditized.
Wow.
If your only competitive edge is that you can manufacture a high-quality physical product and deliver it on time, you're in an incredibly precarious position. The moment your process can be documented, it can be exported or automated.
Someone else can just do it.
Someone else, somewhere in the world, with lower overhead and cheaper labor, can copy your process and execute it for less money. Quality is no longer a differentiator. It is simply the baseline expectation to even enter the market.
The text provides some incredibly concrete, almost jarring examples to drive this home. It points out that Ford Motor Company, historically an icon of American mass production, actually manufactures Jaguars.
Right.
Anheuser-Busch, the massive conglomerate famous for Budweiser, brews Kirin beer. And an anonymous giant manufacturing plant in Vietnam makes Nike sneakers. The physical production is outsourced to the lowest bidder because it's a commodity.
Exactly. Nike doesn't view itself as a shoe manufacturing company. They're a storytelling company that happens to contract out the creation of shoes. The magic isn't in the factory.
So if the bottom of the U-curve is the commoditized production of stuff, where has all the high value migrated?
It has moved to the two extreme high edges of the U-shape.
Okay, let's look at the left edge first.
On the far left edge, soaring high above the middle, you have invention. This isn't just incremental improvement. This is the conceptual act of making stuff up, creating entirely new paradigms and radical solutions that didn't exist yesterday.
On the right edge.
On the far right edge, you have storytelling. This is the new marketing. It's the ability to craft a compelling narrative, authentically live up to the promise of that narrative, and spread that idea to a specific audience.
So if we extrapolate this out to a strategic level, the real money, the real leverage, and the massive profit margins in today's world are found on the edges. It's the ability to take something that people may or may not actually need from a utilitarian standpoint, and through the sheer power of storytelling, transform it into something they absolutely desperately want.
Yes, the transition from fulfilling needs to generating wants is a defining characteristic of the new economy. But let's bring this down from the macroeconomic level to the deeply personal level.
Yeah.
Because the text makes a brilliant, somewhat terrifying connection to your individual career.
Ooh, I love this part.
Think about a traditional resume. Think about how we are taught to present our value to the labor market. Historically, resumes are built entirely around proving your worth in the middle of the old curve. They are exhaustive lists of how good you are at getting stuff done.
Right. We fill our resumes with bullet points like, I managed a team of 10, I processed 500 invoices a week, I bent the metal, I filled out the compliance forms, I created the quarterly spreadsheets, I managed the daily operational crises.
Every single one of those bullet points is essentially telegraphing to the market. I am a highly efficient producer in the middle of the curve. I am a reliable cog in the machine.
Yikes.
But if the macroeconomic theory holds true, those are now the most commoditized, vulnerable skills in the global marketplace.
So what does this all mean for you listening? If I'm sitting at my desk right now looking at my typical workday and I realize I'm spending 90% of my time and mental energy just producing, optimizing processes, or getting stuff done, I'm actually operating in the most replaceable, lowest value part of the modern economy. I'm essentially just a human factory worker on a digital assembly line.
You'd have a profound wake-up call. If you are operating purely in the middle of the U-curve, your competition is global. And increasingly, your competition is artificial intelligence and automation.
Because AI can definitely do the middle of the curve.
Oh, better and faster.
Yeah.
True job security, and certainly any exponential growth in your career or your business, is not going to come from just getting 5% faster at filling out the spreadsheet or managing the inbox.
So what's the move?
The path to becoming indispensable requires you to actively migrate your skills and your daily focus to the high edges of the new U-curve. You must cultivate the skills of the edges. You must either become an inventor, someone capable of lateral thinking, generating radically new concepts and solving unarticulated problems, or you must master the art of storytelling.
The right edge.
Yes. You must learn how to take ideas, synthesize them into compelling narratives, and spread them to build authentic alignment.
This is such a massive practical takeaway. Tomorrow morning, or even right now as you listen to this, audit your business model. Audit your own career trajectory. Look objectively at where you spend your energy. Are you competing at the bottom of the U-curve?
Are you just producing?
Right. Are you just another commodity producer fighting a price war you can't win? Or are you actively migrating to the edges, operating in the high-value, defensible realms of invention and storytelling? That is the only place where true leverage exists.
The shift from making stuff to making meaning is not a temporary trend. It is the defining economic transition of our time. And the organizations and individuals who fail to understand it will simply be engineered out of the value chain.
Okay, as we bring this deep dive in for a landing, let's tie all these threads together into one clear, cohesive insight. The soul of this chapter, the massive paradigm shift we promised at the beginning, boils down to this. Making the physical thing is no longer the hard part.
No, not at all.
It is no longer the most valuable part of an enterprise. The true art of modern business and the real secret to exponential growth is the architecture of belief. It's about taking a rational, commoditized object or service and, through the power of a deeply authentic story, transforming it into an irrational, deeply felt want.
You achieve that transformation by recognizing the fundamental truth of human psychology. People are not buying the physical reality of the object. They're buying the way the object makes them feel.
The story.
They're buying the story they get to tell themselves and the story they get to signal to others when they interact with your idea.
Now that we understand the mechanics and the raw power of a good story, the very next question you have to ask is, how do you find the exact right audience who is absolutely desperate to believe it?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because you can't just shout a story into an empty room, and you can't force a story on someone whose worldview inherently rejects it. We'll explore exactly how to map out those worldviews and find that perfect, receptive audience in our next deep dive.
But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on everything we've unpacked today. We've spent a lot of time analyzing the stories that massive companies, brands, and movements tell you. But turn that lens inward for a moment.
Yeah.
Think about the story you tell yourself about your own life and career. Are you treating yourself like a commodity stuck in the middle of that U-curve? Just walking through life listing your features and specs to the world, hoping someone picks you based on price? Or is it time you finally took control of the narrative, migrated to the edges, and started telling a remarkable story about your own value? Have you ever wondered why two completely rational, highly intelligent people can look at the exact same product on a shelf, or even the exact same raw data on a spreadsheet, and walk away with fundamentally opposite conclusions?
Oh, it happens every single day.
Right. I mean, imagine you have two hiring managers,
Yeah.
and they are looking at a single resume, just one piece of paper.
The exact same facts.
Exactly. So the objective fact on the paper is, took a 2-year gap after college to travel.
Okay, yeah.
Hiring manager A looks at that and sees just a massive red flag.
Oh, yeah. Like someone who is unfocused or avoiding the real world.
Totally noncommittal. But then hiring manager B looks at the exact same sentence and they see a bold, curious self-starter.
Yeah.
Someone with global perspective.
It is endlessly fascinating to watch the cognitive gymnastics people perform in these situations.
It really is.
Because you can have two people presented with identical objective facts, and they will fight to the death over what those facts actually mean. And, they aren't even debating the ink on the paper. They are defending the entire psychological infrastructure they built before they even walked into the room.
And that right there is the ultimate invisible barrier in communication.
Exactly.
Because before you even open your mouth to sell an idea or pitch a new product or try and ace a job interview or even just convince your partner of something, the person you were talking to has already made up their mind.
Yeah, they really have.
And they haven't made it up based on your facts. They've made it up based on this hidden lens they view the entire world through.
So today, we are doing a deep dive into step 1 of how ideas actually spread in our modern world.
Which is such a crucial topic.
It is. We are looking at the foundational understanding that a person's pre-existing worldview and the specific frames that communicators use got to that person's brain long before you did.
Right.
So for anyone out there listening, anyone interested in business, entrepreneurship, or simply being a vastly more persuasive human being, mastering this concept is everything.
It really is the absolute difference between shouting your facts into a noisy void and, sparking a genuine movement.
Totally.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission for this deep dive is incredibly specific.
We want to decode how to find your audience's hidden biases.
Right. We want to figure out how to stop this exhausting, endless attempt to appeal to every single person on Earth.
Which never works anyway.
Never. And instead, we want to learn how to craft a story that perfectly, seamlessly aligns with a very specific group's worldview.
Yeah.
So where do we start? I mean, we have to begin by looking at a massive paradox from the source material, don't we?
We really do. It's what we might call the illusion of the mass market, or the paradox of universal wants versus individual worldviews.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, if we zoom all the way out and look at humanity on a macro level, we essentially all want the exact same thing.
Like basic human drives?
Right. There is no great mystery to it. We all want to be safe. We want to be healthy.
You want to be loved.
Yes. And we want to feel respected in our communities. We want to be successful, whatever that means to us personally.
Sure.
We want to have enough money to buy what we want. We want friends, fun, a clean world to enjoy those things in.
Just universal human desires.
Exactly. And here's where the great failure of traditional marketing theory becomes just painfully obvious. If we all want the exact same things, why do we take completely radically opposite tacks to achieve them?
Oh, man, that is the million-dollar question. Because traditional economics, and honestly traditional marketing too, they just assume that if the goal is identical, the rational path to that goal should be identical.
Right, but humans do not operate like algorithms.
Not even close.
The theory of objective utility completely falls apart when you look at actual human behavior. I mean, if we were purely rational, everyone would drive a moderately priced, highly reliable car.
Like a Honda Civic.
Exactly. It gets you from point A to point B safely, efficiently, and cost-effectively.
But you look outside, and the roads are filled with massive lifted trucks, tiny two-seater sports cars.
And vintage sedans that break down every 3 weeks.
Right. Why doesn't everyone practice the exact same religion? Or wear, utilitarian gray jumpsuits?
The example that really brings this to life for me from the text is the wedding dress.
Oh, the wedding industry is an absolute masterclass in this paradox.
It really is.
Because when you look at it, the average price paid for a wedding dress is what, around $799?
Roughly, yeah.
But on one side of that average, you have women who will happily, eagerly pay 20 times that amount.
Oh, they will drop $15,000 or $20,000 for a dress they will wear for exactly one day.
For one day.
Yeah.
And then on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, you have women who would proudly, happily borrow a dress for free from a friend.
Or buy one at a thrift store.
Yeah. So if we look at that purely objectively,
Like a Martian visiting Earth.
exactly. To a Martian, it makes zero sense. The biological or practical function of the dress is merely to cover the body and provide warmth during a ceremony.
Right. And the fabric of the $20,000 dress does not offer 20,000 times more physical protection from the elements than the borrowed dress.
Right. So why the massive disparity?
Because it's not about the fabric at all. It's entirely about the lens through which those two different women view money, status, tradition, and self-worth.
Right. The worldview.
Exactly. Let's think about the woman buying the $20,000 dress. She is fulfilling a deeply held belief about what that day represents.
Maybe her worldview is that this is the singular moment she gets to be royalty.
Or that the monetary investment proves the seriousness of the commitment. Or even that she needs to signal her success to her family.
So the price tag isn't a bug for her. It's a feature.
Yes. Now contrast her with the woman borrowing the dress. Her deeply held belief might be that spending thousands of dollars on a single-use garment is morally wasteful.
Sure. Or maybe borrowing a dress from her mother connects her to a generational lineage that feels, much more authentic to her.
Right. Or perhaps her worldview is simply that the marriage matters, not the wedding. And she wants to signal to her community that she is practical and grounded.
They both want to feel beautiful, loved, and respected on their wedding day. That's the universal want.
But their path to getting there is governed by a completely different set of internal rules.
And if you are a bridal shop owner, right, and you try to sell the $20,000 dress to the woman whose worldview prioritizes practicality and generational connection.
She won't just decline the purchase.
No.
She will feel insulted. She will view your shop as frivolous and out of touch.
Right. And conversely, if you try to pitch the borrowed practical angle to the woman who views her wedding as a royal coronation, she will think you are cheapening her dream.
Exactly. Same universal want, identical biological need for clothing, but entirely different worldviews.
Okay, let me push back on this a little bit. Because if everyone is so incredibly different and everyone has their own highly specific, emotionally volatile way of achieving these universal wants, how is marketing not just a complete crapshoot?
Wow.
I mean, how can you possibly predict what's going to work when you are dealing with millions of individual psychological profiles? It just sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting, and it absolutely feels like a crapshoot if you treat the market as one giant uniform blob.
Right.
The key to unlocking this, and frankly saving your sanity, is deeply understanding this concept of the worldview.
Okay.
The source material defines a worldview as the rules, values, beliefs, and biases that an individual consumer brings to a situation before you even introduce your product.
Yeah, and there's that brilliant quote referenced in the text from Red Maxwell.
Oh, yeah. Lenses distort things.
I love that visual. Lenses distort things. It means nobody anywhere is seeing objective reality.
Nobody.
We are all wearing these invisible glasses tinted by our upbringing, our past experiences, our fears, our desires.
Right, and whatever information comes at us gets bent, refracted, and distorted by that specific tint before it ever reaches our rational brain.
And what's crucial to understand here is that a worldview is not a fixed, immutable genetic trait.
Definitely not.
It's not who you are intrinsically. It is what you believe right now in this specific context. Our lenses change depending on the room we walk into.
That's a huge point. Let's give a concrete example of that context shifting.
Okay.
Say you have a guy, let's call him Jason. 4 years ago, Jason went to a used car lot, and he had a terrible experience.
We've all been there.
Right. He bought a total lemon, overpaid, got aggressive financing terms, the whole nightmare.
Ouch.
So today, Jason needs a new car and walks onto a dealership lot.
Right.
His worldview at this exact moment, the lens he is wearing, is incredibly thick with suspicion.
Oh, totally. Defensiveness and a baseline belief that all car salespeople are predators trying to trick him.
Exactly. Now, contrast Jason with another customer walking onto that exact same lot on the exact same day looking at the exact same model of car.
Okay.
That this second customer has bought 3 vehicles from this specific dealership over the last decade.
Oh.
They love the service department, they get Christmas cards from the owner, and they feel deeply taken care of.
So their lenses are completely different.
Night and day. And if a salesman walks up to both of them and uses the exact same pitch,
The exact same facts about the car's mileage, the exact same welcoming smile.
it will fail spectacularly on one of them.
Right.
Because the salesman is assuming an objective reality that simply does not exist. Jason's lens distorts the friendly smile into a shark baring its teeth.
Yeah. While the loyal customer's lens sees a warm welcome from a trusted friend. Same input, opposite conclusions.
Yeah.
So the realization here is that you have to stop treating potential customers or clients or voters or whoever as a monolith.
Right. The era of the mass market is dead.
Like the idea that you can run one vanilla, middle-of-the-road ad during the Super Bowl and appeal to everyone.
Oh, it's been dead for a long time. To succeed now, you don't aim for everyone. You have to find what the text calls clumps of people. Yeah, you look for groups of individuals who happen to currently share the same biases and the same worldview, and you tailor your entire story to that specific clump.
Okay, so if the worldview is this internal lens or this internal set of rules,
Yeah.
we need to draw a very clear distinction between a worldview and a frame. Because these two terms get tossed around in business literature a lot, and they are frequently conflated.
Oh, constantly.
So how do we separate them?
Well, if we use a visual analogy, think of the worldview as the wall of a house that someone has already built.
Okay. Well,
They spent years building this wall. It's made of bricks formed by their parents, their schooling, their culture, their past traumas, and their triumphs. It is solid. It is already there.
right.
You, as the communicator, the marketer, or the salesperson, cannot easily knock down that wall and build a new one.
No way. People hate having their walls knocked down. They get incredibly defensive.
Absolutely.
If you walk up to someone and tell them their fundamental belief system is wrong, they don't say, "Oh, thank you for the data. I will change my personality."
No, they dig in their heels.
Right. It's the exact opposite of persuasion.
So if the worldview is the wall, the frame is how you choose to hang your specific story, your specific product onto that existing wall.
Oh, I love that.
A frame leverages a consumer's existing bias. It doesn't fight it. It's the packaging of your idea designed to fit perfectly into the shape of what they already believe.
So you aren't trying to change their mind. You are phrasing your idea so it agrees with their mind.
Exactly.
The example of Krispy Kreme from the text is a phenomenal illustration of this magic of alignment.
Oh, it's so good.
Because for years, Krispy Kreme used this incredibly powerful frame, the neon sign in the window that simply lit up to say, hot donuts.
Just 2 words. And notice what they didn't put on the sign.
Right. They didn't say donuts with a precise sugar-to-fat ratio baked at 350 degrees.
No, they didn't list the ingredients or the caloric density.
They just said hot donuts. And in the mind of the consumer, hot didn't just refer to the thermal temperature of the pastry.
Right. It tapped into a very specific pre-existing worldview.
Yeah, for a massive clump of people in the late 90s and early 2000s, hot donuts equaled fresh. They equaled sensual, decadent, comforting, nostalgia.
It was a reward. It equaled love.
Yes. The frame hot donuts hung perfectly on the worldview wall of people who saw sweet treats as a beautiful emotional indulgence. It was an experience, not just food.
And it worked spectacularly. I mean, they were a cultural phenomenon
Until,
until the worldview of the culture began to shift beneath their feet.
right, suddenly the cultural lens changed. People started looking at food through the lens of the Atkins diet or South Beach, and eventually keto or general wellness.
And the new worldview for many of those exact same consumers became donuts equal carbs, dangerous spikes in blood sugar, and a lack of self-discipline.
Wow, yeah.
And what happened to the company? Krispy Kreme's stock plummeted. They had to close stores, and they went through a massive contraction.
But here is the critical part. The physical product didn't change at all.
Not one bit.
The donut was exactly the same donut it was 5 years prior. The recipe didn't fail, but the worldview of the consumer shifted. And suddenly, the hot donut frame was hanging on a wall that was no longer there.
Or worse, it was hanging on a new wall where it was viewed as a biological threat.
Right. The alignment failed because the worldview moved.
Exactly. Let's look at another example that is so commonplace we don't even notice it anymore. The local furniture store.
Oh, you know the one?
Every mid-sized town has one.
Yes. They have massive vinyl banners on every street corner, every single weekend, screaming, "Going out of business sale!"
Or massive liquidation event, everything must go.
Right. And they somehow managed to stay in business for a decade while constantly going out of business.
Objectively, it's a lie.
We all know it's a lie, but why do they do it? Why does that tactic persist?
Because it's not actually about the furniture at all. It is a highly calculated frame designed for a very specific worldview.
Okay, explain that.
Well, it's aimed at a specific clump of people. Often, it's a spouse or a homeowner who feels deeply guilty about spending money on something as seemingly frivolous as a brand new sectional sofa when the old one in the living room still technically functions.
Right. They want the sofa. The emotional desire is there.
But their worldview is built on a wall of financial prudence that says, we shouldn't waste money on things we don't strictly need.
So the store provides the frame. We are going out of business. Everything is 70% off. The boss has gone crazy.
Exactly. That frame gives that specific person the logical, rational alibi they desperately need to satisfy their emotional want.
They can go to their partner and say, "Look, I know we weren't going to buy a sofa this year, but they're practically giving them away."
It's actually a smart financial move to buy it now because we'll never see prices this low again.
Right. The frame doesn't change the sofa. The sofa is still just wood and fabric.
It changes the narrative to fit the buyer's internal biases about money and responsibility. It allows them to feel like a savvy negotiator rather than an impulse buyer.
Oh, that's brilliant. You know, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we can look at where this concept of framing was really codified and perfected.
Which is in political discourse.
Right. The cognitive linguist George Lakoff has written extensively on how frames literally shape reality in politics.
Yes.
Now, to be clear for you listening, when we look at politics here, and we're purely acting as mechanics under the hood of language right now, strictly observing how the engine works without taking any sides.
Totally impartial.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can see how both the political left and the right use this masterfully to reinforce what their communities already feel.
It is vital to look at this neutrally because the mechanics are identical regardless of the ideology.
Right.
Think about how different political groups label the exact same objective phenomenon. Let's take the early days of the digital age, when people began downloading copyrighted music and movies without paying for them.
Right. That is the objective action occurring on the computer.
But look at the frames. One group frames this action as file sharing.
Sharing is such a fascinating word choice.
It really is. It taps into a worldview of community, of open access, of democratized information. The internet as a utopian public square.
It sounds generous, harmless, and progressive.
Exactly. The other group frames the exact same action as stealing or piracy.
And stealing taps into a worldview of property rights, law and order, and moral boundaries.
Right. If you believe strongly in the sanctity of property rights and the reward for individual labor, the word sharing makes you furious because it masks a crime.
But if you believe information should be free and corporate monopolies are evil, the word stealing makes you feel oppressed because it criminalizes culture.
Same objective action. Two completely different frames for two different worldviews.
Here's another one that is constantly in the news. The objective reality is legislation that regulates the purchase or ownership of guns.
Okay.
One side frames their effort as firearm safety. The word safety aligns with a worldview centered on protecting children, reducing societal harm, and communal responsibility. I mean, who could possibly be against safety?
But the opposing side frames that exact same piece of legislation as banning handguns or infringing on Second Amendment rights.
Right.
And that frame aligns with a worldview focused on individual liberty, self-defense, constitutional purity, and a distrust of government overreach.
Exactly. Or how about describing a passionate religious group? One side might call them fanatical right-wing fundamentalists.
And the word fanatical frames them as dangerous, unreasonable, and out of touch with modern society.
Right. But the other side will describe that exact same group as people of deeply held beliefs.
That frame honors their conviction, their moral steadfastness, and their loyalty to tradition.
And here is the core insight for anyone trying to persuade, right? In every single one of those examples, the words chosen by the politician, the activist, or the marketer are not designed to change the minds of the opposition.
No, that is the most crucial part. They aren't trying to convince the other side at all.
Never.
Because they know they can't knock down the wall.
Yeah.
The frames are masterfully designed to reinforce a bias their own community is already feeling.
Yeah.
They are hanging a picture on a wall that is already built to ensure their base gets angry, gets motivated, and goes to the polls or opens their wallets.
So you have to frame your message to embrace the listener's worldview. If you try to force your idea onto them using a frame that clashes with their existing beliefs, your idea won't just be rejected.
No.
It will simply be ignored. You will be entirely invisible to them.
Which brings us perfectly to the next critical concept in the text. A consumer's worldview determines two very specific gatekeeping factors before you even get to clear your throat to make your pitch.
And those two gatekeepers are attention and bias.
Right.
Let's look at a corporate scenario to make this concrete for everyone listening.
Yeah.
Imagine Rebecca.
Okay, Rebecca.
She is a purchasing agent for a massive, slow-moving Fortune 500 company.
Yeah.
It is her job to buy enterprise software for the whole corporation.
Now, imagine Rebecca has a specific worldview about her career and her role in this bureaucracy. She believes her job is strictly to maintain the status quo and avoid any risk whatsoever. She thinks nobody ever got fired for buying from the biggest, safest, most established vendor.
So her worldview is built on survival and flying under the radar.
Exactly.
So you walk in with a bold, innovative, brand new software startup pitch. It's faster, it's cheaper, it uses AI. It's the future.
Good luck with that.
Right. Because Rebecca's worldview is highly risk-averse, the first gatekeeper, attention, slams the door in your face immediately.
She might literally not even take the meeting.
You are invisible because you don't fit her rules for corporate survival.
And, even if you manage to secure the meeting, maybe through a mutual connection, the second gatekeeper bias is sitting right there in the boardroom waiting for you.
Oh, yeah.
She will view your entire bold pitch through a lens of deep suspicion. Every innovative feature you highlight, she will perceive as an untested liability.
Right. When you say agile and disruptive, she hears unstable and likely to crash our servers.
Exactly. But rewind the tape. What if Rebecca has a completely different worldview?
Okay, like what?
What if she just got her MBA, she wants to make a name for herself, and she believes her path to a VP promotion is to drastically cut costs by finding the most cutting-edge, disruptive innovations before her competitors do?
Oh, then the gates swing wide open.
Right.
Her attention is captured immediately by your startup status. It's exactly what she's looking for. And her bias colors your pitch as a massive opportunity, a resume builder for her, rather than a threat.
It is the exact same pitch, the exact same software, but the gatekeepers of her mind dictate the outcome before you even plug your laptop into the projector.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, and I have to challenge his concepts of always matching the frame to the worldview.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because when we talk about perfectly framing our message to match what someone already believes, I have to ask, isn't this just pandering? Yeah. Are we just telling people what they want to hear? I mean, if we only ever speak to their existing biases, how do we ever introduce something genuinely new or disruptive to the world?
That's a fair question.
I'm going to use Steve Jobs as an example. The classic mythology of Steve Jobs is that he didn't care about what the consumer thought they wanted. He famously said, people don't know what they want until you show it to them.
Right, the classic quote.
When he introduced the iPhone or the iPod, he wasn't pandering to the worldview of people who loved flip phones or CD players.
Mm-hmm.
He forced a completely new paradigm on them. So doesn't that contradict this whole theory?
It's a fantastic challenge, and it's a trap a lot of very smart innovators fall into.
Oh.
They think that because they have a genuinely new, undeniably true idea, they shouldn't have to play the game of framing. They think the truth, or the superior technology, should just speak for itself.
Right, the whole if you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door fallacy.
Exactly. But let's look closer at Steve Jobs because he actually proves the point about framing beautifully.
Really? How so?
When Jobs introduced the first iPod, he didn't walk out on stage and say, "Here is a 5 gigabyte Toshiba hard drive wrapped in polycarbonate."
Huh? No, he definitely didn't.
If he had, the gatekeepers of attention and bias would have shut down for 99% of the population because the average consumer's worldview at the time didn't care about data storage metrics.
No, they cared about their CD collections.
Yes. So how did Jobs frame it?
1,000 songs in your pocket.
Exactly. He tapped into an existing worldview. People love their music, they love portability, and they were currently frustrated by carrying around bulky books of CDs.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
He used a frame that perfectly aligned with their existing desires to introduce a wildly disruptive piece of technology.
So it wasn't pandering.
No. Using a frame to match a worldview is not pandering, it is the price of entry. Think of a person's worldview as the bouncer at the door of a very exclusive club.
Okay.
If you walk up to the bouncer and start screaming about how you want to completely change the music they play inside, he is not letting you in.
You're out on the street.
But if you walk up, show the bouncer the VIP pass he expects to see, and speak to him respectfully in a language he understands, he opens the door.
Right.
You don't have to pander forever, but you absolutely must speak respectfully to their worldview to get your foot in the door. If your initial message conflicts with their worldview, you are literally invisible to them.
So the frame is the Trojan horse. You use their existing bias, their existing desires, to get inside the walls of their mind. You agree with them first.
Precise. Well, actually, I take that a step further.
Okay.
Once you are inside, once you have earned their attention and bypassed their defensive bias by showing you understand their world, then your story can start to work.
Right.
Then you can show them something genuinely new, like a digital music ecosystem. And because you've aligned with them initially, they are open to being convinced.
But you cannot start with the disruption. You have to start with the alignment.
Exactly. You don't fight the current of a person's pre-existing beliefs. You use it to steer them where you want to go.
That makes so much sense. Let's pivot to where we should actually be aiming these perfectly framed stories. Because historically, businesses have been obsessed with the middle of the market, right?
Oh, totally.
We all know Jeffrey Moore's famous technology adoption bell curve. You have the innovators on the far left edge, the people who camp outside the Apple store,
Right.
then the early adopters. Then you get that massive hump in the middle, the early and late majority. And finally, on the far right edge, the laggards who refuse to upgrade their flip phones until the 3G network is literally turned off.
Yep. And the mistake businesses make is thinking that curve only applies to tech gadgets.
That is a massive misconception.
Huge. That bell curve maps human bias, and it applies to almost every single worldview and behavioral trait you can think of.
The example in the text is brilliant. Let's map that exact same bell curve to environmental issues.
Okay.
On the far left edge, the innovators, you have groups like Greenpeace. These are people entirely driven by an extreme worldview of saving the planet at all costs.
Yeah.
They're willing to chain themselves to old-growth trees.
Right. Then you have the massive center, the mass market. Their worldview on the environment is highly pragmatic.
Right. I want to do the right thing for the planet as long as it's cheap, convenient, and doesn't disrupt my daily routine.
Exactly. I will happily recycle, provided the blue bin is right next to my trash can and I don't have to wash out the peanut butter jar.
Yes. And then on the far right edge, the laggards, you have a worldview that actively resents environmentalism.
Right. They view it as a threat to industry or personal freedom.
The text jokingly calls this the nuke the baby seals demographic.
Yeah, quite the image.
Looking at that curve, traditional marketing logic, the stuff taught in business schools for decades, it screams at you to go after the middle.
Of course.
The middle is where all the people are.
Yeah.
Go after the giant center clump who want convenience. So why is aiming for the middle a trap?
Because the center of the curve is incredibly crowded, jammed with noise, and totally devoid of unfulfilled wants.
Oh.
The middle is satisfied. Every massive, boring, well-funded corporation is already screaming at the center.
Yeah, that's true.
Think about the tea market. Lipton and Tetley own the center of the tea market. They are selling perfectly average tea to average people whose worldview dictates they just want a warm, Slightly caffeinated beverage that costs 4 cents a bag.
Right.
If you launch a new tea company and try to compete in that center, you will be crushed. You can't outspend Lipton, and the consumer in the middle doesn't care enough to notice your nuanced pitch.
Which brings us to companies like the Republic of Tea, or Tazo, when it first launched. They looked at that massive homogeneous center of Lipton tea drinkers, and they completely ignored it.
They didn't even try to capture 1% of the middle.
Instead, they looked at the edges of the curve. They looked for an unfulfilled worldview.
Yes. They found a tiny clump of people on the edge who didn't want cheap and convenient. They found people who wanted to feel like connoisseurs.
Right. People who wanted to treat tea the way a master sommelier treats fine wine.
Their worldview was, I want a hot drink that is really special, that tells a story about its origins in the mountains of Taiwan, that comes in beautiful minimalist packaging.
I want this because I'm not like the rest of the crowd who drinks dust in a paper bag. I have refined taste, and I'm worth the indulgence.
Exactly. Republic of Tea framed their entire story around that highly specific, slightly snobby edge worldview.
And it worked?
It worked beautifully. That previously ignored community woke up. They paid attention because someone was finally speaking their native language. They gladly paid 10 times the price of Lipton.
Wow.
And more importantly, because this edge group is passionate, they became a cult. They talked about it to their friends. They gifted it. They spread the idea.
This brings up an interesting point about the scale of these worldviews. When we say words like environmentalism or status, it sounds grand. Like a worldview is always this massive global philosophical stance.
But it's not, is it?
No. A worldview can be incredibly niche.
It often affects tiny, seemingly insignificant decisions. It affects how we view a premium chocolate bar or a specific radio commercial or the formatting of a resume.
And the author uses a great phrase to describe hunting for these niche groups. There are no doorbells in New Hampshire.
Oh, I love that one.
Let's spend some time on that because it's a curious metaphor. There are no doorbells in New Hampshire. What does it actually mean for someone trying to find an audience?
Well, it's an analogy for finding those specific hidden clumps of behavioral commonalities that indicate a shared worldview.
Okay.
Imagine you find a small town in New Hampshire where, for whatever historical or cultural reason, nobody has a doorbell. They just knock on the door.
Right. To an outsider, it's just a weird quirk.
But if you are paying attention, that shared behavioral quirk signals a shared worldview, perhaps a community that values directness, informal neighborliness, and lacks pretense.
So in a modern digital context, what is a town with no doorbells?
It's finding these hyper-specific behaviors that seem random, but actually point to a deep shared lens.
Okay, think about the mechanical keyboard community online.
Yes, perfect example.
It's a group of people who will spend hundreds of dollars and hours of their weekend lubricating the individual switches on a computer keyboard so it makes a specific FOC sound when they type.
It's amazing. To the massive center of the curve, people who just type on whatever flat keyboard came with their laptop, this behavior is completely insane.
Totally nuts.
But to that edge clump, that behavior signals a worldview. I value tactile feedback, I value deep customization, I appreciate analog engineering in a digital world, and I find joy in the tools of my daily work.
So if you want to sell them something, say a new type of desk mat or a productivity app, you don't pitch them on cheap and easy. You pitch them on bespoke, customizable, and engineered.
Right.
Or think about people who obsessively maintain inbox zero. That is a town with no doorbells.
Absolutely. Their worldview is rooted in control, digital minimalism, and anxiety reduction through organization.
The mass market has 40,000 unread emails and doesn't care. But if you are pitching a software tool to the inbox zero crowd, your frame needs to speak to their desperate need for digital serenity.
Another great example from the text is Daily Candy, or really any highly curated daily email newsletter.
Right.
The mass market views daily promotional emails as spam. Their worldview is, my inbox is a private sanctuary, get out.
Right. But there is a specific clump of people who actively opt in and want to get an email every single day about new fashion, indie food pop-ups, or niche tech news.
Because their worldview is, I want to be the one in my friend group who knows about the cool new thing first. I want curated discovery.
So if you can find these hidden clumps, these metaphorical towns with no doorbells, you can frame a story perfectly for them.
Exactly. You stop aiming for the noisy, crowded, average middle where you will bleed to death competing for average people.
You succeed by being an extremist in your storytelling to activate the edges.
Cater specifically to them. Those small clumps will turn your idea into a cult. And eventually, that cult's enthusiasm will bleed over, influence the middle, and turn your niche idea into a mass market trend.
Okay, but even if you do everything right, you find the edge, you decode their no doorbells worldview,
Mm.
and you frame your story perfectly, you are still going to hit walls, right?
Oh, undoubtedly.
The text identifies two incredibly common, deeply frustrating worldview hurdles that business people and innovators face every single day. Let's break them down, starting with the first one, which I think is the bane of every entrepreneur's existence.
Yeah, hurdle number one is the classic. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
The worst.
This is arguably the most formidable worldview a marketer can face. You know objectively you have a better product. You know it will save the client time or money or stress.
But they refuse to notice it, let alone buy it.
Yeah.
Because their current solution technically functions.
Right. The fear of change and the friction of transition is almost always greater than the cost of sticking with a mediocre tool.
We see this everywhere. People will literally wait until they have a major health scare to change a terrible diet.
Exactly. Or they will use a clunky, infuriating software system at work every day for a decade because the perceived pain of learning a brand new system feels far worse than the daily annoyance of the old one.
The devil you know is always preferable to the devil you don't. So how do you overcome this deeply ingrained worldview?
Well, you have two main solutions. Solution A is reconfigure your offering to make starting completely frictionless.
Frictionless.
You have to drastically lower the barrier to entry so the fear of change is neutralized.
A perfect historical example of this is Salesforce. To understand what they did, you have to remember what enterprise software buying looked like in the late 90s.
It was a completely different world.
If a company wanted a CRM, customer relationship management software, it was a nightmare. The worldview of the IT buyer was terrified.
Because buying software meant spending hundreds of thousands of dollars up front.
Right. It meant buying physical servers, putting them in a chilled room, enduring a 2-year installation process with consultants, and basically risking your entire career if the implementation failed.
It was a massive, high-friction decision. The if it ain't broke hurdle was 20 feet high.
So Salesforce didn't just walk in and say, our software has better features. They offered a completely different frame.
They said, no software.
No software. That was their actual logo for a while, the word software with a red line through it.
Brilliant. Because they delivered it over the internet. You didn't buy servers. You didn't hire consultants. You just paid a cheap monthly subscription fee per user.
They made the friction disappear. The buyer didn't have to overcome the massive psychological hurdle because the cost and risk of trying it were so incredibly low, it bypassed the fear entirely.
Hey, it's just $50 a month. We don't have to install anything. If we hate it in 30 days, we just cancel.
And it completely changed the entire software industry by respecting and then bypassing the buyer's risk-averse worldview.
Yep. And then there is solution B for the ain't broke hurdle, which is much more aggressive, but sometimes necessary. Break it.
Break their current system.
Exactly. If your product or the cultural movement you are creating completely breaks an existing system, the consumer has no choice but to adopt your solution.
Or at least consider it, because their old way is now functionally obsolete.
The transition from the fax machine to email is the ultimate example of this.
Oh, that's a good one.
When email first started appearing in offices, it didn't just politely walk in and say, I am a slightly faster alternative to the fax machine.
For a long time, people resisted email because the fax wasn't broke. You put the paper in, it made that screeching noise, and the paper came out in another office. It worked fine.
Right. But as more and more people on the edge adopted email, the utility of the fax machine literally began to break.
Because once your boss, your biggest clients, and your internal team were sending attachments via email, expecting instant replies, and CCing multiple people at once.
Your previous communication strategy of standing by a fax machine was rendered totally ineffective.
The new paradigm broke the old one, forcing adoption.
Yeah.
You couldn't hide behind if it ain't broke anymore because email broke it.
That's right. Which leads us to the second major worldview hurdle identified in the text. I like working with you.
I like working with you. Now, on the surface, this sounds like a positive statement, not a hurdle.
It does. But it speaks to the immense power of permission and the reality of competing against entrenched relationships.
Okay, explain that.
This hurdle is the realization that you should focus your energy on audiences that already have a bias to work with you, rather than shouting at strangers who are already happily working with someone else.
Ah, Right. It goes back to the daily candy example, or anyone who has opted into a relationship with a brand.
Exactly. If a customer has given you permission to talk to them, if their worldview includes the baseline belief that I like hearing from this company, they provide value to me, you have an incredible advantage.
The hurdle is trying to force a relationship where permission doesn't exist, especially when they already have permission with a competitor.
Yes. Spam email fails not just because it's poorly written, but because it violates the fundamental worldview of the recipient who believes my inbox is my private space and strangers are intruders.
So if you are a consultant trying to win a client, and that client has a 10-year relationship with a different consultant who they like, simply pitching, I am 10% cheaper, will rarely work.
Right. Their worldview includes loyalty to their current vendor.
But if you build a list of people who want to hear from you, who like reading your insights, you bypass that hurdle entirely. You're preaching to the choir, and the choir wants to buy the hymn book.
That's exactly it. When you are facing stubborn resistance, you can't just shout louder or throw more facts at the wall. You either need to drastically lower the friction of trying your idea like Salesforce, or you need to be part of a paradigm shift that makes their old way of doing things entirely obsolete.
And always cultivate the audience that already likes working with you. So what does this all mean? If we pull all of these threads together, the universal wants, the wedding dresses, the Krispy Kreme donuts, the gatekeepers, the edges of the curve, the New Hampshire doorbells, what is the ultimate lesson here for the listener?
The soul of this entire chapter is a massive reality check.
Yeah.
Marketing, persuasion, leadership, selling an idea. These are not rational sciences.
They really aren't.
They are not mathematical formulas where X features plus Y price equals Z sales. You cannot succeed by simply walking into a room, laying out a spreadsheet, and presenting the objective best quality at the best price.
Because objective facts don't stand a chance against deeply held emotional biases.
Never have, never will.
I mean, if facts worked, nobody would smoke, everyone would save 20% of their income, and we wouldn't have political gridlock.
Exactly. The best communicators, the most successful marketers and entrepreneurs, they aren't functioning as scientists. They are functioning as artists and psychologists.
That's a great way to put it.
They realize that whatever is being sold, whether it's a B2B software subscription, a political candidate, a $20,000 wedding dress, or a cup of fancy tea, it is being purchased because it fulfills an emotional want, not just a practical need.
They embrace the theater of it all. There is a legendary quote from Judy Garland that the author uses to sum this up. Hey kids, let's put on a show.
Let's put on a show. It means acknowledging that the story you tell, the frame you build, and the emotional resonance you create are just as important, if not more important, in the split second of decision as the objective utility of the thing you are selling.
You have to craft a story that people want to believe, one that fits perfectly onto the wall they have already built.
That is the secret.
And that brings me to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over today as you go about your work.
I love this part.
Think about the last major, exciting purchase you made. Or think about the last time you passionately agreed with a brand new strategy pitched at the office. I want you to be really honest with yourself. Were you really buying the objective, empirical facts of the situation? Or were you buying the frame? Were you buying the story that perfectly, invisibly matched the hidden biases, the fears, and the desires you already had?
It's a humbling question when you really dig into it. We all think we are the rational exception to the rule. We all think we just look at the data. But we all have a worldview.
We all wear the lenses. Now, knowing all of this, knowing how to get your foot in the door by matching someone's worldview, it leads to the next massive piece of the puzzle.
This is where it gets really fun.
What actually happens in the brain in the exact split second they finally notice you. When you get past the gatekeepers of attention and bias, how does the human mind process that sudden influx of new information? We're going to uncover that psychological magic trick in our next deep dive into step 2. People notice only the new, and they make a guess. You won't want to miss it. So you have the budget. You have a really great product.
Right.
You bought the ads, you secured the shelf space, and you hired the expensive PR team. So, I mean, you're in control of the conversation, right?
You would certainly think so.
Yeah, but you're wrong. The absolute biggest myth in business today is this idea that money buys you the power to dictate exactly what people hear.
It's a huge misconception.
It really is. So, in today's deep dive, we are unpacking the hard truth that as a marketer or an entrepreneur or a creator, you are fundamentally not in charge of your own message.
Yeah, and that's a tough pill to swallow.
Definitely. We'll explore why consumers' pre-existing worldviews and just the sheer chaos of modern media mean that they actually control the narrative. And we'll talk about why letting go of this illusion of control is the only way to build a business that actually thrives in the real world.
Yeah, it's incredibly common to feel this sense of whiplash when you first confront this reality.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you pour your capital, your time, and your absolute best engineering into a new venture. And the idea that you aren't actually holding the steering wheel, I mean, it feels deeply counterintuitive.
It's terrifying for a lot of founders, I imagine.
Totally terrifying. But our mission today, and we're drawing heavily from Chapter 4 of Seth Godin's work on storytelling in a low-trust world. Our goal is to move you from that place of feeling overwhelmed to a place where you feel genuinely energized by the leverage you actually do possess.
Right, because there is leverage. It's just not where we usually look for it.
Exactly. But to find it, we need to dissect the actual mechanics of how people process information and how they construct stories for themselves, because honestly, until you understand that underlying architecture, you are basically just shouting into a hurricane.
Well, let's attack this core delusion right out of the gate then. This whole idea that financial resources just automatically equal narrative control.
Yeah, let's get into it.
It feels like this hangover from the Mad Men era, right?
Yeah.
We still culturally operate on this assumption that if I just buy enough billboards or, if I blanket the internet with enough targeted social media ads, I am holding the microphone.
Right. The I have the money, therefore I command your attention mindset.
Exactly. Like I have the budget, so I command the attention of the prospect and the retailer. But the landscape has completely fractured.
Well, the landscape hasn't just fractured, it has fundamentally inverted.
Okay, what do you mean by inverted?
So historically, we fell for this delusion because for about a half century, it was actually true.
Oh, right. Because of how media used to work.
Yeah, the mass media industrial complex worked on a strict model of forced scarcity. There were basically 3 television networks, a handful of national magazines, and very finite shelf space at the local store.
So if you could afford to be there, you won.
Precisely. In that specific environment, capital did buy control. Advertising drove the economy with these prepackaged one-way stories because the consumer literally had no alternative inputs.
They couldn't pull out their phone and check 100 reviews.
Exactly. But today, the sheer volume of data has completely broken the human capacity to passively receive information.
The text mentions this numbing barrage of buzzwords, which I thought was so accurate. You walk down a grocery aisle, or you just scroll through a feed, and everything is screaming at you.
Oh, it's deafening.
It's just new and improved, organic, healthy, disruptive, AI power. It's like an arms race of superlatives.
It is an arms race, and the collateral damage of that race is consumer attention.
Yeah.
To really understand the depth of this problem, you have to look at the sheer complexity of what is actually being introduced to the market every single day now.
It's not just basic household goods anymore.
Right. We are long past the era of just selling soap based on how many suds it makes. Today, you are launching complex software suites or, synthetic biology health supplements or decentralized financial tools.
Things that take actual effort to understand.
Exactly. There is an enormous amount of teaching required just to get the consumer to a baseline understanding of what you're even selling. You have to explain the underlying mechanism, the specific use cases, why your formulation is some scientific breakthrough.
But the brutal reality is that consumers refuse to be your students.
They absolutely refuse. They do not have the time or the energy for it.
I always think of it like being at a massive, incredibly chaotic rock concert.
Okay, I like that visual.
So the brand walks in, right, dressed to the nines, thinking they are on the main stage with a microphone, bathed in a spotlight.
But they're not.
No. In reality, the brand is just another person jammed into the middle of the mosh pit, trying to shout their resume at a total stranger who is just trying to enjoy the music.
That is so accurate.
It's loud, it's disorienting, and absolutely no one bought a ticket to listen to your sales pitch.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. You aren't on the stage. You are in the pit. And to truly grasp why that stranger in the mosh pit is ignoring you, we have to look past basic marketing theory and actually dive into evolutionary biology.
Oh, the frog and the fly analogy from the text.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a brilliant illustration, and it cuts right to the core of cognitive filtering. So a bullfrog has a minuscule brain weighing maybe 24 grams.
Tiny.
Right. Now, a human brain, by contrast, is this massive, incredibly energy-hungry organ, roughly 60 times as large as the frog's. We dedicate an astonishing amount of our daily caloric intake just to powering our visual cortex.
We burn a lot of energy just seeing the world.
Exactly. And yet, with all that massive evolutionary investment, a human being cannot snatch a housefly out of midair with their bare hands.
No, I mean, I've tried. It's impossible.
We are far too slow, and the fly's erratic flight path is just too unpredictable for our motor systems to track in real time.
But a frog, with the brain the size of a pea, does it effortlessly.
Instantly, it just snaps it right out of the air. And the mechanism behind how the frog achieves this is the absolute key to understanding modern consumer behavior.
Okay, break that down for us, because that's a big leap from a frog to consumer behavior.
So the frog doesn't have the processing power to render its entire visual environment in high definition like we do. It just doesn't have the hardware, so it doesn't even try.
It just ignores most of what's out there.
Yes. The frog's visual system is optimized for one strictly defined task: detecting sudden changes that look like either food or predators.
Wow, okay.
If you take a frog and place it in a box surrounded by freshly killed, completely static, motionless flies, the frog will literally starve to death.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Even if it's completely surrounded by food?
Yes, because its brain does not register that food is present. The flies aren't moving. The frog completely ignores the static environment to conserve its limited processing power, focusing entirely on anomalies.
That is wild. But our brains kind of operate on the same basic principle, don't they? I mean, obviously, we aren't hunting flies in a box. But we are utilizing what neuroscientists call predictive processing. We don't actually take in the whole world in real time. Our brains are essentially prediction machines.
That is the precise cognitive model. The human brain is bombarded by millions of bits of sensory data every single second.
It's way too much to handle.
Exactly. If we tried to process every single input consciously, we would instantly overload and shut down. So the brain projects a model of what it expects to happen. It predicts the environment.
Like when you're driving on a familiar route?
Yes. Think about your daily commute to work. You drive for 30 minutes, you pull into your parking spot, and suddenly you realize you have zero active memory of the last 5 miles.
Yeah, highway hypnosis. You just totally blank out.
You didn't process the trees or the familiar billboards or the color of the cars around you because everything was static to your expectations. Your prediction machine handled the driving while your conscious mind was thinking about, a morning meeting or what you're having for lunch.
Right? You only snap back to reality when an anomaly occurs.
Exactly. A car swerves into your lane or a siren goes off, and suddenly you are completely consciously alert.
So, applying this back to the mosh pit analogy, if a marketer is just shouting the same new and improved benefits or using the same polished corporate jargon as literally every other competitor out there.
They aren't signaling an anomaly.
Right. They are the static environment. They are the dead flies in the frog's box. The consumer's prediction machine literally filters them out before the message even reaches conscious awareness.
That is the architectural barrier every single business faces today. If you are just another voice claiming to have, best-in-class service or a fully optimized supply chain, you are motionless to the consumer's prediction machine.
You're invisible.
Completely invisible. It isn't that they evaluate your claim and actively reject it. It's that they never cognitively register you made a claim at all.
Which means the practical application for you listening right now, this is huge, is a complete reallocation of your resources.
Yeah.
To stop trying to buy compliance through sheer volume.
Yes. Volume does not equal penetration.
Exactly. Doubling your ad spend to shout your generic message twice as loud in the mosh pit doesn't magically make you the lead singer on the stage. It just makes you annoying static.
Exactly right.
Your objective isn't to force people to listen. Your objective is to engineer a meaningful, jarring change to their environment so that their prediction machine actually stutters. You have to force the error in their predictive coding so they actively choose to pay attention to you.
And this requires a really fundamental pivot in how we view the communication process itself. Because let's say you do it. Let's say you successfully engineer that anomaly.
Okay, so you break the static, the frog actually looks at you.
Right. The natural assumption is that once you have their attention, the transmission of your message will be this crisp, high-fidelity transfer of data.
Like handing them a file.
Exactly. But the reality of communication is incredibly fuzzy. It is highly, highly fragmented.
Now, I want to push back on that slightly, just to play devil's advocate.
Sure.
If I have their attention, and I have a perfectly refined elevator pitch, let's say I've A/B tested my copy for months until it's a proven, conversion engine, why wouldn't the transfer be crisp? If the words are exactly right, the message is right, isn't it?
Because you are operating under the assumption that the consumer is prioritizing the exact same data points that you are.
Oh, I see.
But people cannot listen to everything, so they construct a mosaic out of random fragments.
Yeah.
Even if you possess the ultimate magic phrase, it would be practically useless because you have zero control over which consumer is listening to which specific fragment of your presentation.
So they are selectively decoding the signals based on their own internal biases.
Exactly. Imagine you're pitching a brand new financial service. You deliver your meticulously crafted verbal message. One segment of your audience might actually listen to the words, process the logic, and make an assumption about your financial stability based on your rhetoric.
Okay, that's the ideal scenario.
Right. But a second group in that same room completely tunes out the speech. Instead, they are hyper-fixated on the typography of your slide deck, the cut of your suit, and the fact that you seem, I don't know, slightly nervous.
They're reading the room, not the pitch.
Yes. They make a snap judgment about your competence based entirely on nonverbal aesthetics. And then a third group ignores the speech and the suit entirely and just flips straight to the final page of your handout to look at the fee structure.
Making their decision entirely on raw price anchoring.
Precisely. You broadcast one unified message, but the audience received three completely different, fragmented stories.
The logical countermeasure to that, and I know this is what most traditional business advice dictates, is to just flawlessly engineer the entire front door.
Oh, the obsession with the first impression.
Right. If we know people are forming these rapid, fragmented judgments based on nonverbal cues, shouldn't the strategy be an obsession with making sure that first impression is perfect? Like making sure the retail space is absolutely spotless, the phone is answered on the first ring with a cheerful voice, the website loads in under a second.
That instinct is universal. And honestly, it drives billions of dollars in misallocated consulting fees every year. It feeds directly into what the text identifies as the myth of the first impression.
Myth. But we're always told how important it is.
We are deeply conditioned by that old adage, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. So organizations spend an absolute fortune scripting the phone greetings, investing in expensive marble lobbies, and polishing that initial touch point.
Because they think that's the anomaly?
Right. But the fatal flaw in that strategy is that 99% of the time, the first impression is actually no impression.
Wait, no impression at all? Even with the beautiful marble lobby and the perfect script, how is that possible if their brain is constantly looking for cues?
Because the consumer's prediction machine is still running interference. You can spend a fortune outfitting your sales team in designer suits. You can pump custom-engineered, calming vanilla cedar scents into your waiting room, and virtually every prospect will walk away with zero recollection of those details.
Really? Because they just expect a lobby to look nice.
Exactly. Those things are expected markers of a corporate environment. They are static. They do not trigger the anomaly response.
So the real danger isn't necessarily that someone walks into your marble lobby and has a bad first impression. The real danger is that you literally have no idea when the actual sticky first impression is going to occur.
That is the core vulnerability right there. You cannot schedule the moment a consumer's prediction machine decides to lock in an evaluation.
It could be at any random touch point.
Absolutely. A prospect might completely ignore your multi-million-dollar television campaign. They might sit through your perfectly rehearsed pitch meeting and retain absolutely nothing. But then 3 weeks later, they have a minor billing question and they call your general support line.
And that's when it happens.
Yes. In that unscripted moment, they interact with a tired telemarketer in a cubicle who sounds dismissive. Or they encounter a retail clerk who rigidly quotes store policy instead of just solving the problem. That fragmented, unexpected interaction pierces the filter. That becomes the input that generates the snap judgment.
It's like you spent years funding and directing this grand operatic stage production, but the theater critic accidentally walked in through the back alleyway.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, they see a stagehand smoking a cigarette and yelling at a delivery driver, and the critic bases their entire review of your artistic merit on that one random interaction.
And once that review is written in the consumer's mind, it is incredibly difficult to overwrite. Now we are dealing with confirmation bias.
Right, because human beings crave cognitive consistency.
Exactly. Once their prediction machine has decided, based on that snarky customer service rep, that this company is adversarial and incompetent, their brain will actively seek out evidence to prove that initial thesis correct.
They'll ignore all the good stuff.
They will start noticing every minor flaw in your product, every slight delay in shipping, while completely, willfully ignoring the marble lobby or the high-quality materials you used. They build a fortress around their initial snap judgment.
Wow. So connecting this directly to your daily operations, if you're listening, because you absolutely cannot predict or control what random fragmented touch point will serve as the true first impression for any given customer, a siloed marketing strategy is just doomed.
Completely
You
doomed.
can't just polish the TV ad and then totally ignore the warehouse logistics. If your message is a mosaic, you can't have conflicting tiles. Authenticity goes from being this soft HR buzzword to a hard structural requirement for survival.
It becomes operational.
Right. If the CEO, the marketing copy, and the frontline clerk are all actually living the exact same core values, then it doesn't matter which random fragment the consumer latches onto. The story will naturally align.
Authenticity is literally the only scalable defense against a fragmented media landscape. If you claim to be a luxury high-touch brand, but your return process is this labyrinth of automated chatbots that frustrate the user, you are telling an incoherent story.
And the brain hates that.
The consumer's brain immediately detects the dissonance, flags it as a threat, and rejects the narrative. Your operations must be the physical manifestation of your marketing.
And this realization that consumers piece together their own 3D story from fragmented operational cues, it completely shatters one of the most foundational theories in business, which is traditional positioning.
It really does.
Because for decades, marketers genuinely believed they could just pick a lane, announce it loudly on a billboard, and successfully control the consumer's perception.
We have to address the legacy of Jack Trout and Al Rees here. Their book, Positioning, The Battle for Your Mind, is arguably the foundational text of late 20th century marketing.
It's a classic.
It is, and the core thesis was very elegant. The consumer's mind is a crowded ladder, and you need to find an empty rung and aggressively claim it.
Right, it's a very binary way of thinking. Like, if the market leader is cheap, we position ourselves as expensive. If they're the safe legacy choice, we position ourselves as the risky, innovative choice. You basically find the white space on an XY axis and you plant your flag.
And in a world of profound information asymmetry, that strategy worked brilliantly.
When was this?
Think 1985. Brands held all the cards. If you bought enough airtime to declare yourself the ultimate driving machine, and there was no decentralized internet for consumers to instantly compare your repair records or read thousands of angry owner reviews, the consumer essentially had to accept your one-dimensional claim.
You were whatever you said you were.
Exactly. The positioning was flat, but it was completely unchallenged.
I think of 1D positioning like handing someone a traditional architectural blueprint of a house. It gives you the dimensions. It shows you where the doors are. It's
Right.
empirically accurate. But it tells you absolutely nothing about what it actually feels like to live inside that space. It doesn't capture the way the morning light hits the kitchen counter or how the acoustics sound when you have friends over for dinner. It's flat data. And today, consumers don't want blueprints. They want the full 3D walkthrough.
That is a phenomenal evolution of the concept. The blueprint is no longer sufficient because the brand is no longer the sole architect of the information.
The internet changed all that.
It did. The myth that a corporation like Dell or Ford is in total control of the data reaching the consumer is dead. Today, the vast majority of learning about your product happens entirely outside of your paid channels.
It's happening on social media.
It happens in Reddit threads, in unboxing videos, in the actual texture of the packaging when it arrives, in the tone of your CEO's tweets at 2 a.m. The modern position isn't a coordinate on a graph anymore. It is a three-dimensional living ecosystem of nonverbal cues, and it goes on endlessly.
The text provides a really fascinating high-stakes case study on this exact transition from 1D to 3D positioning, and it's actually from the political arena.
Yes, the 2004 election.
Now, just to be explicitly clear to everyone listening, we are analyzing this strictly through the lens of communication mechanics and narrative architecture.
Right, we are entirely agnostic on the politics themselves.
Exactly, no sides here. But the 2004 presidential race between John Kerry and George W. Bush is perhaps the ultimate masterclass in how 1D facts lose to 3D storytelling.
It is a stark, textbook example of the shift. John Kerry's campaign operated almost entirely on that old Trout and Rees model of 1D positioning.
How so?
He attempted to manage the national conversation through legacy mechanisms. He was issuing incredibly detailed policy papers, releasing carefully worded press releases, and delivering logically structured, intellectually dense speeches.
He was essentially treating the electorate like a hiring committee. He was handing them his resume, his military service record, his legislative history, and assuming that because his blueprint was empirically solid, the voters, acting as rational evaluators, would hire him.
He relied on the transmission of facts, assuming facts do the heavy lifting in human decision-making.
But they don't.
They do not. People do not make decisions based on objective reality. They make decisions based on the subjective story they tell themselves about how a decision will reinforce their own identity. Kerry's campaign failed to resonate because he didn't embody a cohesive three-dimensional story that voters could step inside.
It was too intellectual.
Because his narrative relied entirely on what he said in isolated 1D formats, he was deeply vulnerable to being framed as inconsistent when the broader 3D context of the campaign shifted.
And George W. Bush's campaign took the exact opposite approach. They understood the mosh pit.
Bush's communication strategy was a triumph of 3D positioning. He largely bypassed the 1D policy debates and instead lived a highly specific three-dimensional story.
The narrative of the strong leader.
Exactly. The narrative was the strong, certain, uncompromising leader. And crucially, he didn't just put that on a bumper sticker. He embodied it in every single fragment of his public persona.
It was everywhere.
It was his physical demeanor. It was his specific folksy vernacular that deliberately contrasted with Washington elites. It was the visual imagery of him on his ranch clearing brush in his boots. It was the unwavering loyalty he demanded and demonstrated with his staff.
There's a complete package.
Every nonverbal cue, every aesthetic choice reinforced the exact same narrative architecture.
So the voter's prediction machine takes in all these fragmented 3D signals, the tone of voice, the boots, the physical swagger, the direct language, and they synthesize it.
Right.
They construct a subjective story in their own minds about who this person is and how this person's leadership aligns with their own worldview regarding safety or values. The campaign didn't control that internal monologue. They just rigorously controlled the authenticity of the inputs so the voter would reliably construct the desired story.
That is the pivotal mechanism of modern persuasion. You must choose a position, yes. If you don't, the market will aggressively assign one to you, and you likely won't survive it.
Yeah, nature abhors a vacuum.
But you must internalize that you do not dictate the final message. The consumer uses the lens of their pre-existing biases, their fears, and their aspirations to refract your signals.
For you listening, the application here is profound. You really have to audit your entire output and strip away the reliance on just 1D claims.
Stop relying on bullet points.
Exactly. Stop blasting out bullet points about having 15% more battery life or a proprietary algorithm. Those are facts, and facts do not generate loyalty. They only generate comparisons. You have to start leveraging the 3D signals. The UI design of your app, the specific vocabulary your community managers use, the causes your supply chain supports. It is the holistic, physical manifestation of your worldview that tells the story.
Which brings us to the final and arguably the most deeply entrenched resistance point to this entire philosophy.
I know where you're going with this.
Because everything we've discussed, authenticity, narrative, 3D signaling, makes intuitive sense when we talk about consumer goods. It's easy to see how a luxury watch or a new energy drink relies on a story. But there is a massive sector of the economy that violently rejects this premise.
The business-to-business sector, B2B. I can hear the objections already from the listeners.
Oh, doubt it.
If you are selling enterprise software or industrial manufacturing equipment or commercial real estate, there is a pervasive industry conceit that your buyers are immune to storytelling. The belief is that B2B buyers are purely rational, hyper-informed actors. They have procurement processes, they use complex ROI spreadsheets, they make decisions based strictly on utility and math.
It is the most dangerous conceit in modern business, and the text argues convincingly that this delusion is actually far worse and more destructive in the B2B space than anywhere else.
Why is it worse there?
Because professionals who sell services or products to other businesses chronically struggle with shrinking profit margins, precisely because they view themselves as peddling a rational commodity. They believe the client only respects the math.
So they focus all their energy on optimizing the center of the curve. They try to engineer a widget that is 3% faster, and they try to price it 4% lower than the competition.
And that is the literal definition of a race to the bottom. If your entire positioning strategy is, we offer slightly better specs for a slightly lower price, You have commoditized yourself. You have zero brand equity, zero loyalty, and absolutely no story.
You're totally expendable.
And worse, there will always eventually be a competitor willing to undercut your price and accept a lower margin to steal the account.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here again, because I know there are highly technical listeners, maybe founders of aerospace startups or heavy manufacturing plants, who are screaming at their speakers right now.
Let's hear it.
In those industries, utility is life or death. If I manufacture a turbine blade that is tangibly lighter and more heat-resistant, I don't need to craft a 3D narrative about my vernacular or my logo. The engineering specs must trump the storytelling, right? If the math proves my turbine saves millions in fuel, the rational buyer has to choose it.
It is a vital pushback, but it conflates baseline requirements with competitive differentiation. Does the engineering matter? Absolutely. Does the utility have to be real? Without question.
Okay.
If your turbine blade fails mid-flight or your software crashes during a launch, your story is revealed as a fraud and you are out of business. But here's the paradigm shift. Being good enough at the manufacturing, or even being slightly statistically superior, is no longer the differentiator. Utility is simply the price of admission to enter the marketplace.
It just gets you a seat at the table.
Right. It is almost never the primary mechanism by which human beings, even engineers, shape their final desires and make their ultimate selections.
You're saying even the aerospace engineer is susceptible to the story.
Let's examine the automotive industry example from the text because it highlights this psychological reality perfectly. Consider the Volkswagen Touareg and the Porsche Cayenne.
Okay, two very different vehicles.
At the time this text was analyzing them, the VW was priced at roughly $36,000. The Porsche was an $80,000 vehicle.
That is an astronomical price gap for vehicles in the same physical category.
It is a massive gap, and it becomes completely irrational when you look at the supply chain. Those two vehicles were virtually identical underneath the sheet metal.
Wait, really? Identical?
They shared the same foundational chassis, they utilized many of the exact same mechanical components, and they were manufactured in the exact same facility in Bratislava.
Oh, wow.
From a purely utilitarian, engineering, and mathematical standpoint, paying a $44,000 premium for the Porsche is an absurd, indefensible decision. The empirical facts are irrelevant to the transaction.
So if it isn't the engineering, why are intelligent, rational people happily writing an $80,000 check for a $36,000 machine?
Because they aren't buying the machine, they are buying the story. What matters is the internal narrative the buyer tells themselves when they grab the steering wheel with the Porsche crest on it.
It's about how it makes them feel.
They are purchasing a deeply potent 3D signal of status, of personal identity, of aggressive success, and of their specific place in the social hierarchy. The utility, the fact that it has four wheels and an engine, is secondary. They are buying how the vehicle makes them feel about themselves.
I understand how ego and status drive luxury consumer purchases. But how does that psychological mechanism translate to the B2B buyer sitting in a cubicle with a spreadsheet? Where's the ego in buying enterprise server architecture?
The text introduces a brilliant hypothetical to explain this. Think about a corporate purchasing agent named Rebecca.
Okay, Rebecca.
Rebecca is responsible for managing vendor contracts for a massive corporation. When a new B2B sales rep walks into her office pitching a new server architecture, she does not simply look at the math on their PowerPoint. She filters that vendor through her deeply ingrained pre-existing worldview and her own evolutionary survival mechanisms within the corporate hierarchy.
So what is her worldview?
Well, it depends on the story she has built around her professional identity. Let's say Rebecca is highly risk-averse. Her worldview is rooted in security, maintaining the status quo, and above all, not getting fired.
Makes sense. A lot of people feel that way.
When she evaluates the math, she isn't looking for the absolute most efficient edge case performance. She will instinctively favor the massive, established legacy vendor, even if they are 20% more expensive and use slightly older tech.
Because it's safer.
Why? Because the story she tells herself is, nobody ever gets fired for buying from the industry giant. The legacy brand provides a psychological safety net. They are selling her the story of risk mitigation.
Okay, but what if Rebecca is completely different? What if she was hired specifically to shake things up?
If her worldview is that she is a disruptor, an innovator whose entire identity is tied to finding cutting-edge efficiencies and challenging the old guard, she will look at the exact same presentation completely differently.
So you wanted a new thing.
She will actively seek out the scrappy, risky, unknown startup. The legacy brand's safety will feel sluggish and uninspired to her. She will champion the startup because the story she tells herself is, I am a visionary, I discover hidden gems and drive systemic change.
And in both of those scenarios, the spreadsheet is just a prop.
Exactly. In neither scenario is the multi-million-dollar corporate decision based purely on objective math. It is based entirely on the subjective story Rebecca needs to fulfill her psychological needs and reinforce her identity within her tribe.
We want to believe we're so logical at work.
We desperately want to believe that the moment we swipe our keycard and enter an office building, we shed our evolutionary biology and become emotionless, calculating machines. But we don't. We just use complex ROI spreadsheets to post-rationalize the emotional decisions our prediction machines have already made.
Bringing this home for the listener, you must fundamentally recalibrate how you view your buyers. Never assume that a prospect is making a purely rational choice, even if they're wearing a suit, hold a C-suite title, and demand white papers.
They are human beings first.
Right. The path to profitable, sustainable growth in any sector is realizing that combining a genuinely remarkable product with a deeply resonant story is infinitely more powerful and allows for vastly higher margins than trying to outcompete the market on incremental feature improvements. You have to determine whether your B2B buyer desperately wants to feel like a hero, a safe pair of hands, or a visionary rebel, and you must authentically live the story that fulfills that need.
If you spend all your internal meetings obsessing over the microanalytics of why your SaaS platform loads zero point 0.2 seconds faster than the competitor, and you are constantly frustrated that the market isn't rewarding your superior engineering, this is exactly why. You are attempting to sell raw utility to a species that only buys stories.
Let's synthesize this journey, because we have radically deconstructed the traditional approach to market communication today. We started by dismantling the myth that capital equals control, utilizing the frog and the fly to prove that human brains actively filter out anything that isn't a jarring anomaly.
Right, breaking through the static.
Then we explored the fuzzy, mosaic reality of fragmented messaging, proving that an unscripted negative interaction with a telemarketer will easily overpower a $1 million ad campaign.
The 99% rule of first impressions.
We moved past the flat blueprint model of 1D positioning with the stark contrast of Bush and Kerry. And finally, we dismantled the B2B commodity trap by proving that whether you are buying a Porsche or enterprise software, you are ultimately buying an identity.
When you weave all these concepts together, the overarching revelation is a complete paradigm shift in the architecture of brand building. Marketing is no longer a monologue. It's a conversation. You do not stand on a stage with a megaphone dictating terms to a captive audience. Your brand is a co-created reality.
Co-created. I love that. The consumer is literally doing half the work of building the brand.
They are completely complicit in the process. They utilize their pre-existing worldviews, their inherent cognitive biases, and their mental prediction machines to filter out the relentless, deafening noise of the modern economy.
They pick and choose.
They selectively gather the fragmented 3D signals you put out into the world, the UI of your app, the tone of your refund policy, the quality of your materials, the way your CEO speaks under pressure, and they retreat into their own minds to construct the story themselves.
So if they are the ones holding the hammer and nails, building the story in their own heads, what leverage do we actually retain? The absolute soul of this chapter seems to be that your only remaining power, your ultimate leverage in a chaotic world where you fundamentally do not control the message, is radical, unwavering authenticity.
That is the inescapable conclusion. You cannot force a message into a consumer's brain through repetition. You cannot trick a prediction machine with a clever slogan if the underlying operational reality contradicts it.
The dissonance will kill it.
The only strategy robust enough to survive this low-trust, highly fragmented environment is to build an organization that lives a story so deeply true, so operationally consistent, and so remarkably different from the static, that when the consumer inevitably stumbles across those random fragmented pieces, every single piece points in the exact same direction.
It all aligns.
When the story is structurally authentic, the consumer chooses to adopt it, they use it to reinforce their own identity, and most importantly, they eagerly spread that story to their tribe.
Now that we've established that you are fundamentally not in charge of the conversation, it raises a terrifying but thrilling question. How do you systematically design a story so perfectly authentic and so deeply resonant that your audience eagerly takes charge and does the heavy lifting of telling it for you? That's exactly what we'll uncover in our next deep dive.
And as we close, I want to leave you with a specific diagnostic to run on your own life. Think about the last major significant purchase you made, whether it was a massive vendor contract for your business or a luxury item for your personal life.
Something big.
Now, perform a mental exercise. Strip away the logo. Erase the brand name. Remove the aesthetic design and the social cachet associated with it. Look only at the raw physical utility of the item itself.
Just the amount.
Did that pure utility actually mathematically justify the premium price you paid? Or did you happily, willingly hand over that premium because of the story it allowed you to tell yourself? And more importantly, as you look at your own business tomorrow morning, what specific story are you currently charging your customers for?
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.